Everybody, if you would, Kristen has put up the flag on the screen, so we're going to say the Pledge of Allegiance, if you don't mind. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, let me do the screen share here. If I get the right one. Kristen, does that look good? Perfect. All right. Sorry, everybody. We have some technical difficulties here to start out with. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the 2022 Spring Short Courses. You're in the new officer training. And my name is Jeff Krueger. If you don't know who I am, I'm the Executive Director for the Minnesota Association of Townships. And at the end of this month, will mark my first full year with the association. And I'm happy that you all could join us. If you are all new officers, welcome and congratulations to your victory in March. I don't know if it was a tough battle or not, but we're definitely happy to have you here. And I just want to kind of go over some things about what as the screen says, the purpose, mission, and resources for township officers that are provided by MAT. And MAT is just the acronym for Minnesota Association of Townships. And so to no further ado, I just want to kind of go through some of my slides that I have here. It'll just give you a quick overview on some of the things that we have, and then we'll move on to some other training that we have in place for you. In fact, I have a slide here somewhere. I think the next, so the next up would be Lori Stalker for that. So let's move forward here. Whoops, that didn't work. History of townships. Thomas Jefferson had said, town meetings are the wisest invention ever devised by the wit of man for the perfect exercise of self-government. We are the oldest form of government in the United States. And actually, I just recently learned this. So it's just very interesting if you really go back into our history as a country, not just as a state, but as a country, how all this formed and shaped our country. Township government actually came forward from Europe, and when Minnesota was formed with the Northwest Ordinance, we were actually divided up by 6x6 square mile units, and not everybody is perfectly 6x6. But for the most part, they were called survey townships. And then that 6x6 square mile unit was actually divided up even more into 1x1 square mile units, 36 of those, per townships. If you ever notice, if you fly over Minnesota or any of the Midwest states, they have townships, it'll kind of look like a patch quilt where you see these perfectly square units of land. And those are remnants back from the 1787 when our state was first formed. This is me. Again, I'm Jeff Krueger, the Executive Director of MAT. I am also a township officer. I've been a supervisor in Newmarket Township in Scott County for the last 4 years, roughly, and happy to do so. And like I said, I just started here on March 29th of last year as the Executive Director. And I will talk about some of my staff, that are here as well. We do have a staff, I believe, of about 14. And more than willing to answer any questions that you may have. MAT is a nonprofit corporation. We do have 1,780 members, townships in the state. 1,779 are members of the association. MAT was created in 1933. Basically, as a result of back down in Iowa, townships were losing a lot of the power that the legislature was taking away from them. We didn't want that to happen, so we decided to form a union and to stop that from occurring. What's MAT's mission? It is to support and promote the township of local government in Minnesota through educational programs, structured advocacy, vital collaboration, and procurement of critical resources fundamental to local governments. So how do we do that? Education advocacy. We do help township officials. We have plenty of learning classes for you to take, such as what we're doing this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, to help you to run a government, essentially, and also help keep you out of trouble, answer any questions that you might have, provide any type of legal overall legal assistance. Obviously, any type of if you want any type of representation, that would have to be a separate type of legal representation. But any questions that you may have, that would all come from here at my office regarding ARPA too and things of that nature. But we do provide townships and officers with a single unified voice. I'm one of your lead lobbyists at the state capitol. Steve is also a lobbyist. And we also do hire an outside a firm, Frederickson and Byron, and Shep is one of our lobbyists for that as well. But we do, as I said, educational and training programs along with that. And but educating the public about the heritage and future of township government and its role in state government in the federal system. A lot of people, you'll be surprised, they just don't know much about townships. And so we want to make sure that we get people to understand what it is, who we are, and what we do, and why we need funding for the things that we do. And we'll get into that as well here. Again, how is MAT organized? Again, 1,779 of the 1,780 townships are associated with the association. Township boards primarily represent a clerk, treasurer, 3 or 5 supervisors. And we do have over 9,000 officers in our association. We do maintain approximately 55,000 miles of roads, which is what I advocate at the state capitol, why we need more state funding. And we do also represent over 900,000 Minnesotans throughout all of our townships. The way that the association is divided up is via districts. We have 13 districts in our state. And we have 1 director from each district. They each serve a 3-year term. And so when they represent you at the state level, make sure that your voice is heard. We also have county units, or most of the units, counties do have county units that you can join if you're not familiar with them. You definitely want to tap into that. They are a vital resource for us to disseminate information and just for you to collaborate among your local peers and find out what's happening in each of your regions and how to correct any problems that you might have. It's a great way to also come up with resolutions that you can then present to the MAT board that we can then use in our lobbying effort. Once it's been approved, we can bring that up to the state legislature and fight on your behalf for that. And all that usually starts at the county level. Spring shortcuts is like what we have now. We like to be in person. I've received a ton of phone calls and emails from people basically complaining and saying that they want to have in person. We understand that. We do too. We don't like doing this virtual thing. I can't see anybody. And so it's really hard for me to do this presentation that I'm doing right now when I don't see other faces. That's what I like to see. I feed off of that. But typically what it is that we do 3 straight weeks of traveling, myself and my staff, and to bring you these programs and teach you in person how to do these things and what MAT is all about. And but from the 3rd week in March through the 1st week of April, that's what we're doing, 5 days for each of those 3 weeks. So for 15 days total. This year, since the pandemic started, we have been virtual, and hopefully everything dies down. Next year, we will be in person. That is our goal. And for the rest of this year too, we hope that all of our other events are in person as well. This just shows some past slides of teachings that have been done in the past. Mark Albarado is from the state auditor's office. He has been very generous with his time in the past, coming forward and teaching all of you CTAS, which is the accounting software that townships do use. If you don't have CTAS or not familiar with it, please contact my trainers, and we can get you in touch either with the state auditor's office, or we can help train you as well and to get you up to speed on those. I apologize, I don't have all of my trainers' pictures. I thought I did. Nicole Schluter, I did not have, but these are pictures of our trainers. Lori Stalker, who's also office admin here at the MAT office. Petra Hartness, she's been a trainer for a number of years. And David Frame is also an excellent trainer. He's also a deputy treasurer in Newmarket, which is my township. Clerk treasurer training, we hold those various times throughout the year here in St. Michael. And we also do Four Corners training. This is just a new term that we made up where essentially Lori Stalker has traveled. She did this back in September, I believe. And she also did it in last month in February, where she'll travel to certain spots, especially those areas that do not have are not really served well with broadband, and so more of the remote areas. And just to make sure that we can get our word and our education out to as many people as possible. But I do, for those of you who are served and do have computers and have access to the internet, I do encourage all of you to get onto our website continuously. It is always changing. And that's really the best vehicle that we have to get our information out to you. And we do want to make sure that you have the most up-to-date information. So I want to make sure I'm cognizant of my time here. I do have a lot of slides, so I want to get through these. So there's just another picture from Four Corners Training. So we talked about the Board of Appeal and Equalization. Lori had done that. I believe that was last September. And also some of the ARPA applications that we were doing as well. Do some CTAS training, things of that nature. In January, she was talking more about elections. So we try and do things on a timely basis because things do change throughout the year. Town law review is something our attorneys put on, and just talk about some of the various concerns that townships do face. A lot of it's land issues, land and zoning issues. And so we want to make sure that, again, when things at the legislature does change, we will make sure that we make note of that to you as well. And on that also, I'll be talking about a little bit legislative later on too, but I will have a full or broader presentation on legislative issues Tuesday and Wednesday in the morning, and start off each of those days. If you want to tune into those or just catch the review later on, I encourage you to do that as well. District meetings are held throughout the state in all 13 districts in August. And again, myself and my staff go on a roadshow, and we put on various, educational, more of it's like MAT updates, what's going on. This past August, it was almost all about ARPA and the American Rescue Plan Act, and how to help with funding, what to spend it on, how to apply, that type of thing. And but there's usually something going on, as you'll find out as new officers, usually something going on with the township level that we want to make sure that we get the information out to you. Legislators are usually invited, so that you can actually, speak with them or hear from them as well. And also we hold our elections for the district directors at that time too. Annual event this year is going to be in October in St. Cloud. And again, God willing, it's going to be in person. That is our goal, October 14th and 15th. So please, again, check our website and put that into your calendar, mark that down, because we want everybody there. And we want to try, if it's going to be the first time that we've been in person, that'll be 3 years. We want to try and make this thing a real blowout for us. So essentially located. There will be information as far as places to stay. We'll try and get some rooms booked so that you are blocked off, so that hopefully you can get a better discounted rate on those rooms. So please plan for that. Here's some shows. I believe this is from the 2019 annual conference that occurred back up in Duluth, either 2018, 2019, one of those. The Township Insider, if you're not familiar with this is our quarterly magazine that the association puts out, of course, every quarter. Our next one goes out, I believe, the first part of May for our spring edition. But this too is a great way for us to get our information out to you, especially for those who do not have access to internet and with a decent broadband or computers and so forth. But it's just we do have a calendar issue. That's our fifth edition that we do for you as well. We try to plan out all the events for the following year on there, so you have one source to go to when you want to see what events are coming up soon. We're always looking for good tips on news stories that you want us to feature in those magazines as well. There's usually an article from myself, article from the president of the association, and of course legislative updates, things of that nature, just to kind of keep you abreast of all that. This is our calendar, MAC calendar that we have. This went out usually in December is when it goes out of the prior year. So please take a look at those if you and this is, you can also download this on our website as well. If you didn't happen to get a hard copy of it. And here's our MAT website. Again, I encourage you to always be on here as much as possible. This is the front page of our site, Matt News and Updates. So if anything new is happening, I'm going to be at the Capitol most of this week, testifying on different things for townships, transportation funding, advisory board panel member. Also on annexation, I have a committee hearing on that as well. So we're up there, we're fighting for you. And if you want to find out what's happening with that, our website's the best place to go. One of the things that I have struggled with since I've been executive director is trying to get our people motivated, especially in terms of annexation and so forth. We need to mobilize our voices. We need to get people to talk to your legislators and make them aware that we need annexation reform. We need to have transportation funding, so forth. Other groups are talking. They are constantly in their legislators' ears, and it's having an impact. And township officers tend to be very mute when it comes to talking to legislators. And I haven't figured out why that is yet. Steve, Shep, and myself, we're doing our best to beat the bushes and get our word across. But amplifying, as the slide says, amplifying our voice with township officers that are calling the legislators, getting to know them on a personal level. So when an issue does come up, you can say, "Hey, Joe, hey, Jane, or whoever, I need your help on this issue." They're more apt to listen to you and pay attention to what you have to say. That if it's just a matter of every time you call, it's a complaint kind of thing. But even that is better than nothing. Saying nothing will get us nothing. And so we definitely don't want to do that. Again, MAC communications, many different ways that we communicate with you, constant contact emails. And as new officers, we want to make sure that you are in our system. So please send an email out to my office, and so that we can make sure that you are on the list. That's something when something urgent is coming up. Like we had some things with the oil pipeline last year, and even things on ARPA and annexation too that we wanted people to act on. We'll send out a quick constant contact to people and to hopefully get them mobilized. We do have a monthly newsletter that Kristen and Leslie send out. And again, with our educational programs, legislative alerts that we do, district updates. We also have a Township Tuesday, first and third Tuesdays of every month at 10 o'clock in the morning. We put on a webinar, and you can tune in either by phone or by computer, and you can ask questions at that time. We usually have a short presentation, but it's really for you. And any question that you may have that you're facing, you have questions on, you want a direct answer. Other people probably have the exact same question. And so please tune into that if you'd like, and love to have more people there. We do have a manual on town government, something that we do want everybody to, at least every township, to have and use it during your meetings. So if you have any questions on what this part of a meeting or whatever's happening and so forth, you might be able to find your answer within this manual. So we do have it for sale on our website, and typically when we're in person, we then hand out one of these to each new officer. But somehow we'll have to, next year, again, if we're in person, that's what we're definitely going to want to do. This will also have it updated next year to 2023, but usually it is updated every year. Nothing really has changed in the last year or so, but we do have supplements that we've added to them. We do have an LMR committee. LMR, it meets twice a year. We just met in February, and February is a great event. And again, it is virtual, unfortunately. We usually go to the Capitol and then meet our legislators live, in person, and be able to sit down, have breakfast, or whatever the case is, and actually talk, face to face with the people who are helping to make these decisions for us or with us, and at the state level. And this is also where people of the committee can get together and discuss resolutions and anything that you want to put up to the MAT board as a potential resolution for us to fight or advocate for you on your behalf. It can be state or federal level as well. Big Four is just some of the other things that Matt Matt does or is involved in. I am involved with the Big Four. Every month I have breakfast with the executive directors of the other associations, being the League of Minnesota Cities or LMC, AMC's Association of Minnesota Counties, and also the Minnesota School Board Association. We just want to find out what's happening in each of our type of different demographic and see if we can help each other out or just kind of get some information from them in various forms, whichever way that looks. We are also involved with NATA. NATA is our National Association of Towns and Townships. I am on the board of directors for that, as well as Gary Burdorf, our board president for MAT. He's also on the board of directors for NATAT. And NATAT is essentially what MAT does at the state level, NATAT does at the federal level. And so all this business with the American Rescue Plan Act and even the IIJA that was signed into law last November that people are still talking about, we're trying to figure out what's all about. A lot of that comes through NATAT, and they do our advocacy at that level. And but we have a lot of thanks out to them. They were actually very instrumental in getting the American Rescue Plan Act to incorporate funds to townships, and so that we could actually help to fund our roads and other things that we have planned for that. And the last part of our association, or another arm of our association, is called our MATAT. Our MATAT arm, or the Minnesota Association of Townships Insurance Trust. This is our MATAT Board of Trustees: Gary, Sandy, Jill, Mel, and Tammy. The Minnesota Association of Townships Insurance Trust, this is our staff that we have. Heather Tidmore is our manager. She's brand new, well, not real brand new, but she's about 4 or 5 weeks in. And I thought she was going to be in today. I was hoping to introduce you to her. Dawn Zimmerman has been around for a number of years, underwriting assistant, and Sarah Turek is a recent acquisition for our agency as well. And here, I gotta move this up here, excuse me. We have 3 different parts of our program with MATAT. We have a bond program. Clerks and treasurers are required by law to be bonded and provide proof to the county auditor. And but we also have our workers' comp. Oh, excuse me. Here we go. We have our workers' compensation part of this. And where if you have any questions or concerns, which you will and should, you certainly want to call up our office, either talk to Heather, Dawn, or Sarah, and they can certainly help you out with any questions that you might have regarding that. And of course, we also have the property, auto and liability as well, and the public officials E&O, which is executive and officers insurance as well. Again, any questions that you may have on that, this slideshow will be available online if you want to go ahead and preview or view it again. Sorry, I had to go through it quite fast. I'm running out of time, so I want to make sure we have enough time for the other speakers that are going to be coming up. And I think that's the end of my presentation. That is the end of my presentation. And I don't know if we have time for questions. Kristen, you're the moderator and keeper of time. Do we have any time for questions, or? I lost Kristen.
Hi there.
Hello. Kristen, is there any time at all, or do we have any questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay, great. Well, we can just move on then to Lori, if Lori is ready.
Here I am.
All right. There you go. Take it off. Lori Stalker is.
Hang on. We have a question from Nathan.
Okay. Yes.
You can say it.
Okay. He just said he has a question.
You want to unmute Nathan? You can add.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just real quickly. Do you know, will the township supervisor training tomorrow, will that be recorded for people who unfortunately can't make it?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Great.
Every module that we have here, every speaker will be recorded and then put onto our website for later viewing.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Nathan. Anything else? Again, Lori Stalker is our office admin, also is one of our trainers. She's been trainer, what, 5 years, Lori?
2017. Yep.
Okay, there you go. And so she knows anything that has to do with being a clerk and being a treasurer. And if she doesn't, she'll make it up. But Lori, you go ahead and take it from here. Thank you.
Oh, Jeff, it's only been a year and you know me so well. Yes.
That's
If I don't know
right.
the answer, I will make it up.
That's right. That's
That's not true.
right.
Lori Stalker, I have been the clerk for my township since 2006. I came on board with Matt as a trainer in 2017. In 2019, I was on the board for 3 years, and now I'm in the office, still doing training, amongst other things. Jeff did cover a couple of, I'm going to talk about resources for clerks, treasurers, and supervisors, what's out there for you. I crossed off things that Jeff had already talked about, so this should be pretty short and sweet. Secretary of State's website, excuse me, Secretary of State's website is where you're going to find anything that will have to do with elections. Materials, forms, filing, there's election guides. There's actually some great training videos on there as well. And also the election calendars. So that is a great website to explore and look around. Minnesota State Auditor's website, that's the CTAS, that's where you're going to be putting your financial reporting here at the end of the month. They also have a weekly update. If you send your email address to them, they send weekly updates every Friday. Sometimes there's some great information. Sometimes it won't have anything to do with townships because cities are also included in that. So the state auditor's website is an excellent resource for information. PARA, Public Employees Retirement Association. This is for elected officials and if you have employees. If you have a PARA question, it's not that the trainers don't want to talk to you. I don't want to make anything up when it comes to PARA. So we will send you right to PARA because they will have the correct answers for you. Their rules and all that stuff are just so out there and so different. That's why we send you to PARA. Minnesota Management and Budget, or MMB, what we call it. That is where you are going to be receiving your checks from the state. So the ARPA funds, your gas tax money, anything like that, it automatically gets put into your checking account. And a lot of times they don't tell you what it's for. What you need to do is get your email address to them and they will send an email when they send that money, telling you what it is, what the money is for. Jeff briefly touched on our website. There's also an information library on our website. It has all kinds of different forms for you to look at, resolutions. It also has our manual on there, chapter by chapter. A lot of times I get questions from clerks and treasurers. Lately, it's been supervisors because they're looking for a new clerk. What are the specific job duties of clerks and treasurers? There is not a job description for us. I got my job in 2006 by just come to the meetings once a month, take some minutes, you're good. I don't want to scare anybody away, but it takes a little bit more than that. And we trainers are here to help you. Jeff had said something about the new officer list. It's so important for you to get that back to us so that we can update our system on new officers. If you change your email address, you change your address, change your phone number, anything like that. We send mailings out quite often. And we have been getting calls back saying that we're sending things to treasurers that haven't been there for years. That's because what's in our database is what we're getting from the townships. So it's really important that you get that. It was sent out for your March elections from our office here. It's so important that you get that updated and sent back to us. And that's also for the constant contact. We can update our constant contact with that new information. Get to know your county auditor. They can be your best friend. They will help you with things. They're going to answer your questions. Hopefully, there's some counties that are a little bit harder to get a hold of. I am very fortunate that I have been very good friends with the county auditor, and now there's a new county auditor that I happen to grow up with. So we're going to get along great. But find out who they are, get their email, get their phone numbers, and then your district director. Find out who your district director is, get their phone number, get their email. The map is on our website. Jeff had talked about that a little bit because they're your go-between between your township and the board and the association. So it's so important to get a hold of them. There have been townships that have reached out to us through the director And that is a great way to get some of your questions and concerns addressed. The director will bring it back to the board and the board can talk about it. Maybe it's going on in their district as well. So get to know your district director, get to know your county auditor, get on those websites and just explore. The best thing that you can do as clerks and treasurers is explore those websites and get as much knowledge as you possibly can. Our titles are clerk treasurer trainers, but we also will answer questions from supervisors if we are able to. If it's above my pay grade, like para, and I think it's a legal question, I will transfer you to Steve or Karl-Christian, our attorneys on staff. They probably get upset with me because I probably do that a lot, but I don't want to steer somebody the wrong way. So that's all I have. Feel free to email me, call me, anything. If there's a question that you have, I know I'm 2 minutes over here, but that's because Jeff talked too long. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the question, or give me a call or zip me an email. And I'm going to stay online here while Steve and Carl and listening to what they have to say too. So
If anyone on the phone has a question, you can press *9 and then we'll see.
you're welcome. Like I said, I'll still be around. So if any questions come up, I'll hear you. Thank you for your time.
Morning, everybody. I'm Steve Fenske. I'm one of the attorneys that Lori was just talking about there. And next up, we have our new officer training. Jeff, unless I've missed something, is there something you need to do first? I'm going to take that as a no. All right. So Kristen, I'm going to do a screen share. And if you'll just confirm that I have that folks are seeing what they should see. Do you see the
Looks
new
great.
officer? Okay. And you just see the presentation, right?
Correct. Just the
Okay,
slide.
good. Okay. Well, again, welcome folks, new officers. For those of you who just got elected last week, this is, really new to you. And those who've been around a little bit longer, you may know a little bit more already. To all of you, congratulations, because holding township office is really something to take some pride in. Town officers don't get a lot of attention and a lot of credit, and that's because largely they stay out of trouble. But for all of you, the thing that you should feel pride in is that people put you in this position because they trust you. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today. It's how to fulfill that trust that people put into you. Some of you, I would almost guarantee, did not even run for this position. You probably, some of you got a call saying, hey, you won an election and you weren't running, you didn't file, you didn't run a write-in campaign. That happens a lot with town officers, and it's because somebody leaves the board and there's a need for somebody to step in, and you are probably the type of person in the community that's been active. You may be active in other groups, and that's how people know you. But knowing you isn't enough. They have to have trust in you, and that's why you're here. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. Just about everything we do revolves around public trust as a town officer. The presentation today, we touch on things for supervisors and clerks and treasurers. And there's times when you may be a clerk and you may think, well, this isn't, he just said it was for supervisors. That doesn't mean you should tune out, because there are things you still need to know and things you still need to perhaps help your supervisors with. I also want to thank you just for being here, because people who don't show up to this kind of training and who think, oh, it's just common sense. No, it's really not. There's nothing, I don't really believe in common sense that exists. And especially in this context, there are things in law that you would never guess, you would never think are the case. But you're going to learn them today. And your officers in your township may not know these things. They may not understand this. And it may take some time. So please ask questions today. Feel free. I will answer as much as I can, but we have a lot of material. We are going to take a break in the middle. so you can step out for a moment. But please ask those questions of me. Take your time, ask questions of your other town officers too, okay? And as you don't remember things today, that's understandable. Call us, email us. We are here because you guys are members. We answer your questions. That is what we do. That is our primary job. So please, if something doesn't make sense and I can't answer it today or you forget, call me, call Carl, call Lori. We will help you. If you take nothing else away from this today, take away that there's a lot to learn, but we're here to help you figure it out. Okay, so here we go. Let's get to it. First thing is a little bit about the nature of township government. When we look at township government, it's something that you may not know exactly where it's placed, and it's not obvious in the notion of government as a big concept. So here you have, this is 8th grade civics stuff. This is nothing new to you, okay? So you have citizens. At one point, they organize themselves into states. And then at some point, they decided we're going to have a federal government. We don't really care about them today. We don't care about the federal government. We're talking about local government and state government, okay? So you see the states and you see that branch that's local government. And then at the bottom, you see yourself. You see townships. And you'll notice you are next to cities and next to counties. You are not under the county. And that is quite purposeful. You are not a subservient government. You're not a part of county government. You're not a branch of them. So when you're going about your work, you're going to find that there are certain things you have to work with the county on or with the cities, okay? But there are certain things they have to work with you on. So for example, cities have a lot of control over annexation, and they have some control over land use, even in the township. Okay, likewise with the county. Townships can do land use planning, but the township has to be consistent with the county's rules on certain things, and in some cases the cities. Okay, so we have to work with them. On other things, the counties have to work with us. So for example, liquor licenses. If somebody wants a liquor license in your township, they cannot just get it from the county. That's something that the town board has to approve before the county can grant it. There's other examples in law too, okay, that you'll find elsewhere. But that's kind of where you're placed. The thing to take away here, you're a co-equal branch of local government along with cities and counties. Okay, another bigger picture here within the state government. Well, where do you fit? We have our citizens, and like we said, we have our state government. We have our 3 branches of government. The constitutional officers are often called the executive branch. There's your governor. State agencies sit under the governor. That's MnDOT and DNR. And then you have the other state elected officials, attorney general, state auditor, secretary of state. We interact with them, primarily the auditor and secretary of state. Okay, you'll have some things to do with them, and they set some rules related to what we do. Okay, but their rules come from that middle branch, the legislature. Legislature makes the laws. Townships are what's called a creature of the legislature, meaning you don't exist as a local government, except that the state legislature made townships, and they're the first local government that the state made. They existed before cities even, okay? So all of the laws and stuff we're going to talk about today come from that legislature. We have to pay attention to them and the laws that they make. On the right, you'll see judicial branch. That is something that we interact with because there's court cases, and that branch interprets the laws that the legislature and sometimes the constitutional officers make, and then they tell us what they mean. So legislature makes laws. The courts decide, well, what do those words and laws mean? And so we have our Supreme Court, our Court of Appeals, and District Court. We pay attention to those in our office, and we tell you the things that come up that are important to townships. You do not have to pay attention to those court cases and monitor them. That's a big job, and Carl and I do that. Okay, and we tell you through that Township Insider magazine and our Town Tuesdays and those events that we have, what's coming up and what you need to pay attention to. Okay, but again, you fit in that middle branch. That's where townships are located. You're not an executive branch and you're not judicial branch. You are lawmakers. Okay, so local government, that's our slide from before. You fit under that legislative act, and most of the things you guys do are considered legislative actions. And that's pretty cool because it means that that judicial branch has to give you some deference. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. Now, I mentioned before, townships are creatures of the legislature. It means you don't exist The citizens don't have an inherent right to create a township government as a township, okay? They're all something that came from the state. So the state can change it. They can take it away entirely. They can give towns more powers, and they do, you know, a balance of these things over time. But there's nothing inherent in the citizens going to their annual meeting, for example, and deciding what to do. And this comes up a lot at this time of year. Okay. And this is about that nature of township government. So you now, as your elected officials, sit in that first box. I'm sorry, excuse me, you sit in the second box. Okay, you're the town board. The supervisors are the town board, but the clerk and the treasurer kind of sit in that box too, right? Just like we have separation of powers that you hear about in federal government, you also see that in township government. So these boxes are that separation of powers. So on the left are the electors or the voters. Their powers are only available at the annual meeting, that thing we had last week on Tuesday. And they have certain things that the legislature gave them, but they get nothing more. And that's the same for the board too, the town board, okay? So the biggest power the town electors have, they set the levy. They decide how much they're going to tax themselves. They elect the officers, you guys, and they ultimately create townships by petition, but that's already been done, okay? Notice that doesn't say spend money anywhere in there. They set a levy. Okay, the town board spends money, and that's the biggest power the town board has. The voters set the levy, they tax themselves. The board decides how it's going to be spent, and only the board. So when the voters go to their annual meeting and they say, well, board, we order you to go spend our money in this way. Well, they don't have that power because, again, everything comes from the legislature. And that isn't a power they were given. Only the board was given that power. And there may be political reasons that you listen and you pay attention. But sometimes we've seen town voters try to spend money in illegal ways. Well, the town board couldn't do that. You are stuck within that box of what did the legislature give you? Okay, and that's why we make this distinction of where do these powers lie? Because you have to pay attention to that. The other big town board power is employment. How are you going to get the job done? Surprisingly, to some people, town board members are not elected to go plow the road and dig out ditches. That is supposed to be employees. It's possible. We'll talk about later how you may end up doing some of this work. But ultimately, that's an employment question for the town board. You guys make contracts. You decide what are the local laws, the ordinances. And that can be about land use. That can be about how roads are used. That can be about how neighbors interact. There's a lot of things that you regulate at the town board level. You also create some special boards at different times. Now we have that third box. Okay, the third box is the thing that I think is a little difficult to figure out for some folks. It's these shared powers. And the idea is the legislature gave a power, but they require both groups to act at the same time or to take the action to make it so. So, for example, there's a statute that gives, and it says, town electors, you can do these things. And really, these are powers that they can switch on or off for the town board. Excuse me. They can switch them on and off. Okay, so there's this list of things that they can do. And I've tried to provide some examples here. For example, the town voters decide whether or not the board can spend the money on a town building. Ultimately, the board decides whether to do it. But the town board can't just go. They may have the money in the bank, but they can't go just build a building on their own. They have to go to the annual meeting and get the voter permission to build a building. And then the voters have to say how much is the most that they can spend on that building. Okay, this is a shared power. They both have to use their switch or turn their keys. And if they don't, this thing doesn't happen. Other examples, police and fire protection. That's not automatic in a township. Okay, so to provide police, almost no township does, but a couple do. The voters had to switch that on. Okay, likewise with fire. Fire is a better example for every township. Okay, at some point, the towns couldn't do that. The voters had to go and vote at the annual meeting, switch this power on, and then at the board meetings, the supervisors had to decide, yes, we're going to use that power that we've been given. and go and contract or provide for that service. Cemeteries, bonding for money sometimes has to go before voters. Just to have parks and recreation, you have to have that switched on by the voters. Okay, and there's a bunch of other powers in there too that that voters have a say in. Everything you do is limited. Okay, if you have seen a set of Minnesota statutes before, what you've seen a multi-volume set of all the laws. There's a lot of law that the legislature has created, and that's intimidating. And unfortunately for towns, it's not all in one place. So that's one reason we have the resources we have. We have a town law book that we curate the laws that are most relevant to towns, and then it gets published. There's also an index you can use, okay? But that's just the stuff the legislature makes. And then there's that stuff that the executive branch, okay, MnDOT and DNR, which is the two we often interact with, they make administrative rules that also can regulate townships and individuals. So there's a whole nother set of books on administrative rules. Okay, the point being, all that stuff regulates townships and what you do. Remember, government is limited, right? We have limited government in this country, and townships are no exception. So what you do, you have to have a power for. You have to find a statute before you do something. You may know that you can do something. Well, gosh, we have roads. We have to be able to plow them. Yeah, you're right. But there is a statute that allows you to do these things. Okay. And whenever we do that, we look to the statute and we find what, if we can, we find explicit authority. And some statutes are very clear. You can do X, Y, Z. And it may tell you a procedure, okay, to do it. Other statutes don't tell you exactly that you can do something. I'll give you an example. Can you buy a shovel to do your road work or to maintain the grounds at your town hall? The answer is obviously yes. You may be thinking, of course we can buy this stuff, but there's no statute that says it. And it's because sometimes we can't find the explicit thing in statute. And what we're looking for is an implied power, something that says, well, we can have roads, we can have a town hall, we can have a shop. And to have those things, it must be the case that we can take care of them, because otherwise, why would the legislature let us have them? Just to build them and let them sit wouldn't make sense. So sometimes we're looking for a statute in the implied power. And again, Karl and I, or your town attorney, okay, that's another resource, may be able to help you find those things. When you're starting out in town government, ask questions, ask, where does this power come from? You're not trying to challenge your other supervisors to say, well, we don't have that power. That's not what you're trying to do. What you're trying to do is say, hey, I just want to learn. I just want to know, where is this power located? So that you know, oh, we can do that. And sometimes what you find is a procedure issue. Sometimes there's a particular process that you're supposed to follow that maybe your town hasn't been following. When you have a procedure given in law, that's as much a part of the law as the power to do it. So if you do something without following the proper process, it's as if you acted without the authority in the first place. So let's say you want to create a town road. There's several ways to do it, but one of them is this formal process. And you're supposed to receive a petition or have a permission at the annual meeting, and then you give notices and you hold hearings and you decide if you're going to create a road, and then you set damages and you set the award for damages. That's a fairly long statute, and we have a procedure list, okay, that we've provided for people on our website because it's kind of technical. Well, if you skip a step, if you didn't give the notices that you're supposed to give, it's as if you're acting without authority to begin with. And that can get your township into trouble. Not you, okay? I'm going to clarify, not you into trouble. Again, I've usually put this at the beginning. Some of these things are scary that we're going to talk about. I don't want you to be afraid. None of this is to scare you into not doing this job, okay? Because there are good protections for you as you do it. But it's important not to get your township into trouble. Sorry, I'm going to set my phone here so that I'm not disturbed. There we go. The other big thing we have to be aware of is that spending money. And I mentioned that this is the big town board power, spending money. The voters don't have that power, the town board does. Well, how do you spend money? It's pretty simple. You go to a meeting and you decide what you're going to do, right? But you have to have a couple things in order to spend public dollars, which is everything you touch in a township. And that's done under what's called the public purpose doctrine. This isn't a statute. This is something that courts came up with, interpreting how governments work and trying to create a framework for deciding, well, what is okay for governments to spend money on? Because that's so much of what you do. So the public purpose doctrine says public funds, meaning your tax dollars or anything you get from government, can only be expended for purposes that are authorized by statute, which is the thing we've talked about for a few minutes, and a public purpose, meaning that you have to have some idea that this is going to serve a benefit to people in the community. And the public purpose isn't well defined. This is the definition we've been given, and I will read it because it's important. Okay. A public purpose is an activity that will serve as a benefit to the community as a body, and which at the same time is directly related to the functions of government. So it has to serve your community. It has to be somehow related to what your town does or is supposed to do. Now, there's a lot of things that happen in township that may not have anything to do with township government. And if that's the case, the public purpose doctrine would say you can't spend money on whatever that thing is. Okay. Or sometimes you can do an activity in the township or around the township, but doing the same thing somewhere else may not fit. So for example, your local city may have a 4th of July festival. That's pretty common, okay? Or a local festival of some kind. And they may solicit money from the local governments to support that thing. And let's say they do fireworks. Well, you can give money to another government. That's something you can do. And to give money for the support of a celebration is also something you can do. But let's say that you as a town officer, well, you vacation somewhere else in the state. And over the 4th of July, you're not in your community. So you think, well, I go up to Walker. I don't stay in my community because I have a cabin in Walker. So I'm going to go give money. I'm going to give our town money to Walker for their fireworks festival because then I can enjoy them. Well, it's another government, right? Well, sure. But that, if it's assuming you're not around Walker, that wouldn't make any sense for a public purpose doctrine. Yes, there's a statute to authorize that you give money to another government, but it wouldn't serve any local purpose, any benefit to your community. Okay, so it does matter how you approach this and where you spend the money. Going back to the courts, all these powers and things that we talk about, they can be interpreted by courts if there's occasion for courts to interpret them. So there's a lot of statutes, like I said, not everything has been touched by a court. Many of them have never been touched, and in particular in townships because they're just so overlooked. That doesn't mean you can do whatever you want to do, but it means that you're often going to get credit. You're going to get the trust of the people in your community, and they're often going to let you find a solution, okay, to a problem locally, and they may give you some deference in that. Okay, when it comes to a court, we get deference too, and I mentioned that earlier. Okay, part of the cool part of being in the legislative branch of township government is that, legislative branch of government is that you get legislative deference. So when the courts interpret something that the township does, the courts are supposed to look at that as if it were the legislature doing it and say, well, there's certain things that the courts get to interpret, but when it comes down to making the decision, weighing different options and coming to the best judgment that it can, that's a function for the town board, not a judge. So the court is never supposed to substitute its judgment for yours on a legislative function. Okay, they may say, well, the law doesn't mean what you think it means, but that's not the same as looking at all the factors and deciding among different options, this is the best option for our community. That function is supposed to be reserved for the township. Okay, now, one case in which a court can undo something a town did or send it back for a better decision is if the town appears to have acted without any sense of what it did. The court may be saying, yep, we're supposed to give you deference, but we have no idea how you got to the decision you made. Maybe you flipped a coin. We can't tell. That's going to have to do with what information did you provide in a record of some kind. And the record for townships is your minutes of your board meeting, your resolutions that you make. Okay, those are the primary means. And if looking at those things in a challenge, a court says, we can't tell what you did, they may be saying, this is arbitrary and capricious. It's as if you flipped a coin, and then they'll undo what you did. Okay, this means pay attention to what you're doing, and even small decisions, you want to give reasons for what you're doing in your record. Okay. Holding public office. Okay, I'm just checking at my okay, no questions. All right. When you enter public office, you have to do it in the right way, because again, it's a public trust, and there are statutes about how you enter public office. So those of you who are brand new and you're just elected last week, you probably have not entered office yet. We haven't quite gotten to the date when you could be sworn in yet, I believe, or we're just at it. Depending on their math here. So holding office is something special. And once you take an oath of office, there are more laws that apply to you than did the moment before you took that oath of office. And it's because of that public trust. When you're given these powers of office, there's something that you're given as extra, and it's expected that you're going to follow that carefully, that you're going to take good care to do it well. Okay. So for example, there's a law, there's an oath that says you have to take an oath of office to enter this thing properly. And what should happen is someone from the township should give you a certificate of election, or if you were appointed, a certificate of appointment. And that says, okay, the town is recognizing that you came to be eligible to hold office. And now you're supposed to take this oath that can be administered by various people, but you're supposed to take this oath. If you don't do those things, and then you go to a meeting and you exercise the powers of government, there's a criminal penalty that says, if you exercise the powers of government without the oath, you are impersonating a public official. Okay. Nobody's out there beating the bush trying to convict town officers, okay? But the idea is you have to enter properly, and you have to make some assurance in the way that the statute says that you're going to carry out this duty, that you're taking this solemn oath, and you take it seriously, okay? So the first thing you're going to do, you're going to get this certificate of election after the contest period is done, and then somebody's going to administer the oath, and now you have these other laws that apply to you. All right. This isn't a thing to be scared about, because there's protections too. Okay. But it again goes back to follow the laws, be aware of them. And just by being here today, you're going to be aware of many of them, the most common of them. Okay. So again, not a fear thing. You're here, you're doing the right thing, you're paying attention. Whenever you're approaching something you're not sure what to do, stop. You're in government now. Government moves slow, and it's supposed to move slow, and it's okay to move slow. And there's something we're going to talk about later, the open meeting law, that's going to infuriate you. You're going to hate it, okay? Because it makes you move slow. It prevents you from doing things that seem like you should be able to do easily, but it's meant to slow things down. And you're going to take advantage of that time, I hope, to ask questions, call our office, look on our webpage, call your town attorney, call people you're allowed to talk to, okay? And find out, how do I do this the right way, so that you don't have any issues with this stuff, okay? There's some things with public trust called incompatible positions and conflicts of interest. And I think most people have an understanding of conflict of interest, of at least a basic idea. And we're going to come back to it more to talk about the specifics, but I want to touch on incompatibilities first. An incompatible position is not as obvious, and it often gets misunderstood for an incompatibility. for a conflict of interest. Okay, because they kind of seem to overlap. And that's a feeling people have of, well, something isn't right. This doesn't make sense to me. How can that person do that? But there is a difference. An incompatible position is when an officer, a government officer, is trying to hold two offices at the same time. And for some reason, those things cannot be reconciled. Okay, it's the idea of you can't serve two masters. And this is taken seriously. Okay, so there's certain places in statute where it's specifically called out. And you can't hold two certain offices at the same time. And it's because, as the courts have put it, when their functions are inconsistent, they're so incompatible that you can't properly perform one without potentially harming the other. You're not even supposed to serve in both and try to come to some compromise that serves both okay, in an okay way. It's saying, no, when you take that oath, you owe a fiduciary duty to that organization, to the township in this case, okay, to act in what's the best interest there. And if you're holding, say, county office and township office, and you're trying to decide, well, who maintains the middle of an intersection, which is a common issue, not discussed in law. How do you decide? You could try and find a fairness argument, but then the argument is, well, you didn't serve fully the township or the county, and you served each of them only part way. And that's a problem. Okay. So sometimes we have a statute. For example, you cannot serve in town government as a town supervisor, excuse me, and as a county commissioner, because those are inherently incompatible. There are times when, remember, those two governments sit next to each other and they would be in conflict. Ideally, we generally work pretty well together, but there are times we don't. Okay. Likewise, statute tells us you can't be a supervisor and a park district commissioner. Okay. At some time a problem came up and they decided that was not acceptable. School board members. This is a sometimes. Certain town supervisors can be a school board member, but others can't be. Okay. And other incompatibilities aren't found in statute at all. They're found in case law from courts who are examining something, and some two positions, and they have to try and figure out, is there something inherently incompatible about these? So if you think you have this problem, or if you ever are about to enter another public office, maybe stop and call us or your town attorney and get a sense of, are these incompatible? Okay, because you can't hold two at the same time. The law will say it's not possible to hold two. You may have taken another oath of office. You took the oath to be a town supervisor, then you took the oath to be the county commissioner. Well, that means you can't go back and serve on the town, because the law would say, well, the most recent oath you took is the one that we're going to deem you accepted, and the other one is automatically gone. But now you've gone and acted as a town supervisor. And remember, there's that statute. Now you're impersonating a public official. Okay. Again, it's not like you're going to go to jail, but it's not a good thing. You want to pay attention to these things. Okay. So anytime you see two public offices, stop for a minute and ask some questions. You also, as a town official, once you take that oath, have a duty to report unlawful activity on the town board. Okay. So this is another criminal statute. It's like a mandatory reporter. People are understanding of that idea when we talk about teachers or people who deal with kids or other at-risk persons. It's the same concept. And here's the statute. If a public officer, meaning supervisor, clerk, or treasurer, discovers evidence of theft, embezzlement, unlawful use of public funds or property, or misuse of public funds by any person authorized to expend public funds, the employer officer shall promptly report to law enforcement and shall promptly report in writing to the state auditor a detailed description of the alleged incident or incidents. All of this comes down to, if you think that another officer is stealing money or property from the township or misusing it, then you have a duty. You have no choice but to report that to the county sheriff and the state auditor. And if you don't, there's a potential criminal penalty on you. This has a distinction, though, of unlawful versus just disagree with. And there's a state auditor's case on this. Okay, state auditor received a report that township officer says, well, they're misusing public funds. They put 2 truckloads of gravel on this road and everybody knows it only takes 1. And this is investigated because it's a serious thing. Okay. They have to investigate and make sure that they're doing their job, right? So this goes to the state auditor and they investigate it and they find out, well, no, this isn't unlawful. It's not that the 2 supervisors who decided to put 2 truckloads of gravel on did something wrong. They just had a different judgment than the other supervisor. So it wasn't unlawful. Okay, they just disagreed. Now, let's say a supervisor puts a truckload of gravel on his own driveway. Now we have a problem. Okay, now that's evidence of embezzlement or unlawful use of public funds or property. Okay, or a supervisor lets somebody take the town bobcat or grader out to do some private work, or they do the work on their own property. Again, misuse of public property. Okay, so when you get in these situations, it's a good idea to call someone first and kind of get a reality check of, well, is this unlawful or just do I disagree with it? And we'll try and help you with that. Okay, and give you some sense of what may be allowing them to do something or not allowing to do something. Okay, but it's a serious concept that you want to pay attention to, that you have to watch for, and that the legislature's placed a duty on you to do. All right, when we conduct public business, it's often a question of who makes decisions. We've talked a fair amount about the town board, and we talked to some about the town electors. Okay, and we had those boxes about, well, where does certain decisions get made? Most of the town decisions are made by the supervisors, and that's uncomfortable for some voters, especially when they disagree with the town board. But their answer to that is not to try and do them in the annual meeting if it's not allowed. Their answer is probably to elect new supervisors. Okay. When the supervisors make a decision, they have to have a quorum of the board. Most town boards are 3 people, and that's the default in state law for a town government. But there's an opportunity for towns to have 5 supervisors if the voters allow it. That's a voter decision. Okay, 5 supervisors or 3. The voters decide that. But no matter what they decide, you need a quorum. So quorum is over 50% of the voting power of the board. So if you have a 3 supervisor board, you have to have 2 supervisors present to take any town action. If you have 5 supervisors, you need 3 of them present to take any township action. And the action can happen only if there's a majority vote of those present. The common thing that comes up in boards of 3, they say, well, we only have 2 supervisors and they disagree. Isn't there a tiebreaker? No. The clerk is not the tiebreaker, the treasurer is not the tiebreaker, and that's a common misconception. We hear it frequently. Clerks who are listening in today, do not vote, because you'd be exceeding the powers of your office. Okay. The one instance where a clerk gets a vote is when there's a vacancy on the town board, on the town supervisor. Okay. And then the remaining supervisors and the clerk are the appointment committee. In that case, the clerk isn't a tiebreaker. The clerk votes right along with and participates right along with the other supervisors. Okay. It's not a tiebreaker. So please, clerks, never accept to act as a tiebreaker. Okay. If the 2 supervisors can't get along, that's their problem. They have to work it out, or it means nothing happens. Okay. And that's something other folks will have to deal with. It's not your problem to fix. When we're conducting township business, it's common for towns to think that you have to follow certain parliamentary procedure rules. Okay. But none are required. Nothing requires that you use Robert's Rules or any other book of parliamentary procedure. And if you think about it, those rules are not really made for a group of 3 people. So instead, we tell you to use kindergarten rules. Wait your turn, listen, respond respectfully, don't hit each other, which seriously can be a problem some places. You don't need a book of rules that is hundreds of pages. I can pull out Robert's Rules. It is literally hundreds of pages. Okay. That book is not made for a group of 3 people. You don't need it. You don't have to formalize your discussions. That can be formally could be, well, I move that we do this. I move that we spend money on that. That can be a more formal way of doing it. And then somebody says, well, I second. Well, if you're using the motion and second idea in a board of 3, don't you probably know how that vote's going to turn out? Right? It doesn't make a lot of sense when you try to apply those rules to this small group. It could be as informal as, hey, I think it's a good idea that we put 2 truckloads on that road because it gets degraded so quickly, it's getting a lot of traffic. And then the next guy says, yeah, I think that's a good idea. And the third guy may have a different opinion or the same. And if they all seem to agree, that's the same agreement as if they made a motion and voted. Okay. When it comes to the minutes, the clerk will usually maintain the minutes, and that's traditional. Okay. But you look around in statute and there's nothing that actually requires the clerk to maintain the minutes. It doesn't say that. It says the clerk receives them and keeps a book of minutes, keeps them. It doesn't say takes them and produces them. So supervisors, be kind to your clerks or whoever you have taking your minutes, because they could decide, you know what, I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. Or they could do a first draft and let you take them over. Minutes are kind of an art. There's an art to them. Okay. Minutes are never a transcript. Whoever takes them, remember, it's not everything everyone said. The important things are, what did the board talk about? What did the board decide? And what are the reasons for the decision? It is not every comment that was made. That's the important stuff. You may have to take those votes, especially on spending items. So for example, there's a law that says whenever you have a spending item, every vote has to be listed in roll call. So each person's yay or nay vote on a spending item has to be listed in the minutes. That's important to make sure that it's there. And supervisors, that's a duty for you to do. So your clerk may be helping you, but remember, you have to pay attention to what's there, because those minutes protect your decisions and you as a supervisor. During a meeting, oh, I went too far. Okay. During a meeting, it's usually a town board chair that runs the meeting, as we say, okay? But a chair is just a supervisor. There's nothing, almost nothing in law that says there's a town chairman. Occasionally something will say, well, the town board chair will sign a document or something like that. But there's really nothing in law. It's a position of convenience. That person usually runs the meeting, but it can be changed at any time. Anyone that the board selects can run the meeting, okay? But the town board chair typically will prevail or preside at the meeting, shall we say, okay? And sometimes there's an agenda, sometimes not. During a meeting though, a board meeting, that's where the town board takes its actions, remember. Something to be aware of is public comment. Public comment is very common to have. Again, it's not required by law though. It's a very popular idea to have someone be able to stand up and say what they want to the town board. But if you're going to do that, you should have it formalized in some way. Like you take comment at the beginning of each meeting and you have some rules. For example, you have a sign-up sheet. You take 5, 10 people who sign up. You limit them in time, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that. You can say a lot in that amount of time. And that way you have limited how much time you have to spend at any meeting hearing from public comment, because if you don't, the downside is that some town boards then feel compelled to take every comment and then hear commenters again. And the meeting stretched 3-4 hours. And I'm sure you were promised this would be an hour a month. So it's not going to be an hour a month. Okay. But it shouldn't be 3-hour meetings for most townships either. And you do that by controlling the meeting with these kinds of rules. You can't have rules that are based on viewpoints. So you have to let people get up and speak their mind. You have to let them talk 2 minutes if they agree with you, or 2 minutes if they disagree with you. You can't stop them. You can't have many restrictions on what they can talk about. You could try and say like, well, it should be about town government. Don't come to us about the federal government and what you don't like about the county. Go talk to them. We don't govern them. Okay. You shouldn't come here to announce your candidacy for office just because you have a captive audience, things like that. And then the rules uniformly applied to everyone. That's really important. Okay. Now, public hearings are different. That first thing I was talking about was your town board meetings. It's a meeting of the supervisors where they get things done. It's their opportunity to talk between themselves and take actions. And because of the open meeting law we're going to talk about in a few minutes, that's their opportunity. That's their only opportunity. So they act in that town board meeting. But a public hearing is something a little different. Public hearings are required by some statutes, and a public hearing is more focused on input from voters. Now, town boards can have them for any reason you want. You can just have a public hearing to get input on something, but sometimes a statute will say you're going to have a public hearing. So that road creation statute I gave earlier, or certain bonding, if you're going to borrow money in certain ways, or you're going to do special assessments, some of these things take public hearings, and the statute will tell you. And that's why it's important that you know the statute, or you find out what is the statute for this thing that I'm about to do. At that public hearing, the public does have a right to speak, because that's the point of it. You may need to give a little bit more time than 2-3 minutes. Okay. You don't necessarily have to allow people to transfer their time. Well, I sign up for a spot and I transfer my 5 minutes, and the next guy transfers his 5 minutes, and now we have some person speaking for 40 minutes. That's not necessarily the case. Okay. But you should have rules, and you're in a listening mode. You don't have to make a decision though at that public hearing. Okay. It's supposed to be to get input on something. Here are the basic township offices. These are things you've heard of, and you were told, hey, you won this, and you may have thought you're signing up for a certain thing. There's maybe more to it than you initially thought. And here we kind of have just a basic breakdown of what these are, because so often officers may interfere with each other. And what's important to remember is when they're all elected, when the supervisors are always elected, but clerks and treasurers are usually elected. Again, there's an option for voters to say, well, we're going to make them appointed and no longer elected. It's a little different circumstance. Okay, the statutory duties may be the same, but when a clerk or treasurer is appointed, they're an employee of the town, and the supervisors have more control over what they do. Okay, but clerk and treasurers who are elected, you're elected in your own right. You are not subservient to the supervisors, in particular in your statutory duties, because those are delegated to you, never to the supervisors. Okay, so they're basically listed here, and this is very oversimplified. This is not complete in any way, but the goal here is to get people thinking, I have a lane and I have to stay in my lane. Supervisors, if you don't like how the clerk or treasurer is doing their job, you may be able to talk to them, but you aren't necessarily able to order them to do anything. Likewise, clerks and treasurers. If you have strong opinions about the supervisors and how they act, maybe it's time for you to run for supervisor, right? Maybe that's the answer, because we have these things that are our duties, and those are what you're expected to do. Okay. When we talk about action words here, supervisors decide things. They weigh options and they make decisions. Clerks and treasurers, more often you're receiving, filing, providing. You're doing different things, okay? And those are mentioned here, okay? The different kind of action items, and that should be a direction to how you work. Overall, though, you all have to work together. There's different ways to do that. It's not necessarily required that a clerk or treasurer attend every board meeting. Nothing says you have to be there. You still have to work together, communicate, and respect each other's roles. Okay, and understand that the clerk, for example, is not the secretary for the supervisors. That's not what they do. They have their own serious duties. Okay, and in some cases they can be more serious than the supervisors. The election management in particular. Okay, clerks. I'll give you an example. You're going to hold election materials. Some years ago, we had a town clerk who had ballots and he disposed of them too early. You're supposed to hold on to them. I believe it's 22 months. Lori, correct me if I'm wrong. If you dispose of them early, that's a crime. And this gentleman didn't intend to harm anyone. He just disposed of them too early, and he was convicted of a crime. They're serious things, okay? Again, not to scare you, but be careful and respect each other's roles, okay? All right, as you start, here's what you're going to do. You're going to get the document saying you're in office, your appointment or election document, and then you're going to take an oath. Okay. You're going to attend meetings. You're going to talk to each other. Because of the open meeting law, supervisors don't just go calling other supervisors. You're not going to be able to do that. Okay. You're going to have other resources available for you. Okay. One of them being this training, and then the trainings tomorrow and in the next days and everything online and the people you can call. Okay. Being a new officer, you may know less. You may feel that way. All it means is that you just haven't had the time and exposure to how the township's going to work. But again, don't underestimate your ability to bring something to that board, because you may be bringing things that they're not aware of. The most common thing we hear in this context is a new town officer goes to their town board meeting and they say, well, this is what we learned and here's how we have to do that. And the board members, the others say, well, we've been here forever. Well, that's not how we do it here. Well, there may be ways to do things differently sometimes. And that's the point of local government, right? Local control. But other times there isn't an opportunity to make different choices. And if your town board is making choices that aren't following a statute or aren't following the procedure, doesn't matter how long they've been doing it improperly, they're doing it improperly. When they say, well, we've been doing it that way for a long time, all that means is they just admitted they've been doing it wrong for a really long time. Okay. Urge them to talk to us, bring them the law, show that this isn't an inconvenience. It's really to protect them and the township to do it right. We talked about staying in your lane, using the resources. Whenever you're in doubt, stop and don't do anything. There's almost no time in which you have a real clock working against you. Okay. One exception is when you receive a lawsuit. Then you have a clock working against you. And it's important that you turn that in really quickly to your attorney or your insurer. Okay. You generally don't get in trouble for being quiet and waiting and trying to decide what to do. All right, open meeting law. We're going to do the open meeting law, and then we're going to take a break. There's a lot of slides in this because it's a big piece of governance. It's a part of Minnesota law that's considered good governance law. And people can gripe about Minnesota and law and legislature all you want. But when you go and actually examine laws among different states, you will find that Minnesota is typically a very good government state, meaning it has access for people to see and understand what their government is doing, at least on the local level. Okay. And this is one piece of that. The open meeting laws and statute, it's chapter 13B, and it starts with this statement: all meetings must be open to the public. But it doesn't tell you what a meeting is. When are you having a meeting? Okay, courts are going to give us that definition. This is an important law for supervisors. It applies to supervisors. Clerks and treasurers, this doesn't mean that you tune out right now because you may be helpful to them. Not to pass messages, that's the thing that you're learning not to do, but to learn when they may overstep, or when they may say, oh, I'm going to call the other supervisor, and you say, well, wait a minute, don't do that. This isn't a hurry. We have time, okay? And the purpose of this is for the public. It is not for you, okay? As you hear about this open meeting law, what you're probably immediately going to do is try to break it, because that's what everybody does. They think, well, that can't be. How am I supposed to get anything done? How are we supposed to work? How do we talk? We're just talking. Or they'll say, well, we're not making a decision. We're just talking. Doesn't matter. Or you're going to try to find a way around it. Don't do that, because this is taken seriously and there are penalties against supervisors individually, okay, for trying to break this thing. Lots of people have worked with this for a long time. It's a well-developed body of law, where I said before that some statutes don't have much interpretation. Well, this is not one of them. This is well interpreted. Okay, so the rules that we're going to talk about are important. Don't try to get around them. Don't try to be smarter than the law or the judges or the enforcement authorities, because pretty much everything's been tried. Okay, courts on this one rule in favor of the public, because this is intended to help the public. Notably, the open meeting law does not apply to the state legislature. They very nicely exempted themselves, so they can go behind closed doors and have their meetings and do what they want to do and say anything privately, but you can't. Okay, and I say this to point out, one, yeah, the legislature is doing this thing that doesn't seem so seemly, but also that adds trust to the local government level. And I think people have more trust in the local government level because it's closer to them and because of laws like this, as opposed to the legislature, where we don't always know what they're doing because they make decisions behind closed doors. This law applies to the town board, meaning the supervisors. It does not apply to clerks and treasurers. It applies to every level of township government. This applies to the executive branch. Okay, so state councils that are not the legislature, but like executive branch councils. When they have public meetings of certain officials, that has to be open. Likewise, counties, cities, watershed districts, townships, counties, all of them, they're all related to this, and they all are governed under this same law. This is a situation we're all in the same boat. Okay, but it also means it's the levels below you. So if you have a planning commission, or you have advisory boards, or parks commissions, or whatever you have, they have to learn this too, because it applies to every level of government. And that's so that you can't subcommittee out the decisions or discussions, not just decisions, but also discussions about government, and hide them from the public. Okay, it doesn't apply to any private group. If it's not government, it doesn't apply. Okay, so church boards, VFWs, your citizens group, your companies, just because it's a board of some sort doesn't mean it applies. It's only government. That's well spelled out in this law. Okay, again, the quorum requirements here, because this is important and it relates to how this works. For a 3-person board, your quorum is 2. For a 5-person board, your quorum is 3. There are 3 aspects of this law, and I'm going to say it several times because this I want you to take away today. A township is having a meeting that's supposed to be open to the public when there is a quorum having an exchange about public business, their town business. Okay, a quorum having an exchange about town business. I'm going to repeat this as we go through this because those are the 3 things that a supervisor must know to understand this law. Okay, so we're going to take it piece by piece. A quorum is pretty straightforward. Okay, it's 2 on a board of 3, 3 on a board of 5. If you have that many people engaged in a communication, you have satisfied the first part of this law. Okay, the next is exchange or discussion. This is a big concept. It's not just the decision. Again, it is not just the decision. We get that all the time, even from really well-experienced people, well-trained people who come to these. Well, we didn't make a decision. It doesn't matter. Decision makes no difference in this. Okay. Quorum having an exchange about public business, you've got a meeting that should have been open to the public. Okay. It's all types of exchange. It can be talking, it can be phone calls, emails, text messages, mail, any means of communication you can think of among the quorum would count for this. Okay. It does not include one-way communication. So one person sends an email to everybody. One person says something loudly in a room where other supervisors are there and they can hear it. That alone doesn't satisfy an exchange. We focus here on 2-person or exchange among the right number of people, 3 people if you have that larger board. Okay, that's what satisfies it. Now, the chain meeting and the use of third parties. This is one of those ways that people try to break. They've tried to break the meeting law. Well, gosh, I'm just going to get around it. I'm not going to talk directly to the other supervisor. I'm going to use the clerk who's going to carry my message and then tell me what they want to do and send it back. No, that's called a chain meeting. Okay, we can't do that. That's been tried. And it's something that's relatively easy to figure out, especially in the age of electronic communications. It's really simple to see. Okay, from a legal and enforcement context. So don't try the chain meeting where you or where you have, let's say you have a board of 5. Okay, so you have your quorum of 3. Supervisor 1 talks to 2. Well, we don't have a problem yet. That's only 2. But then 2 talks to 3, and you say, well, those 2 are their own little group. They didn't exchange. Well, this law would say probably they did if it's about the same topic. We're just having a chain meeting. We're going around the spoke here. Okay, so don't try to break it this way. One exception that's important here. If you're setting your meeting days and you call each other, that's fine. You have to be able to communicate just to set the meeting. Now that's something not found in statute anywhere, but it's basically a requirement. How would you know when to show up to have a meeting unless you can communicate about when you can show up to a meeting? This is a chicken and the egg thing. So there's certain things you have to be able to do. Okay. All right. Public business. So we've got a quorum, having an exchange of any kind. It's not this it's just discussion, anything. Okay. Not just decision. Public business. What does that mean? Public business is your town business, things related to your town business or how the town would operate or what the township is doing as a township government. Okay. That's what triggers the open meeting law. Chance or social meetings, not a problem. You can run into people. You can have all three supervisors sitting having coffee. If they're talking about anything but town business, no problem. Okay. Usually we do this meeting in person, of course. And the whole board will pile into a vehicle sometimes. That's not a problem. They can all get in the truck and we know they never talk about township business while they're in the truck, right? As long as you don't, you're fine. Okay. Training events like this, when we're in person, we take questions and everybody can hear them and other members of your board could hear them. If it's a training question, those have been addressed, okay, by courts and said, nope, that's allowed when it's put in a context of abstracts or training. Okay. If it's dealing with a specific issue, just at a training event, no, we kind of got a problem. Okay. But you know, for example, a board will approach me, okay, at an event and one person will talk to me and I'll say, well, look, guys, we've got an open meeting law thing going here because this is a specific problem. So I'm going to communicate with one of you. Who do you want me to talk to? And then you guys can take this back to your meeting. Okay. That's the kind of thing you got to think of. It's not that you have to run screaming from each other and never be in the same place with each other. You should have relationships with these people outside the township board meetings. Okay. That's a good thing. And that's okay. Some exceptions. Townships are given an exception. You can have site visits, meaning if you have to go look at something off site, a lot of times townships don't have employees. That's the norm. So how do you know what's going on out on the roads, for example? Well, you have this exception where the board can go out as a group. You can all pile into the same vehicle and you go out and you do a road visit, okay? Or look at the road conditions, or you go to a site visit to see what somebody wants to do with their culvert or with their building permit or whatever it is. You can do that. The idea with this is not that you go have an off-site meeting or that you have the meeting in the vehicle. The idea is you're going to go look and you may point out things. You may point out conditions to each other. Okay. Here's what I'm seeing. And you write them down and then you go back to your open public meeting where the public can hear and see what's going on. And then you have your exchange about the issue. Okay. So conditions are, yep, I see this culvert looks rusted. The culvert looks rusted is not a statement of what to do with it. The culvert looks rusted is, hey, I want you all to look at the condition of this culvert so that you see what I'm seeing. Okay, it's that kind of stuff. When you use this, it's common, most common in the springtime when you do your road visits, when you do your road tours. You do not need to get a bus. I mean, you could get a bus and pile the public in, okay? But you don't need to do that. It's not necessary. Okay, that exception. Now, if you have employees, you could use the employees to do work for you, but it's not required. This is still available even if you have employees. It's in the judgment of the board. If they need to go do a site visit, they can go use this. Okay. I gave the example of setting the meeting. Okay, that's another thing where you can talk to each other. That's okay. If one supervisor is designated, let's say, as the road manager, in this case, it's like you can't talk between meetings, right? Okay, you supervisors, you can't put it on the phone and say, well, gosh, what do we do about this washout? Okay, maybe we can in an emergency. Well, how about the snow? For those of us in the middle of the state here, we've been having snow today. Well, townships that have that, they're not supposed to call each other and say, should we send the plows out? They can't do that under the open meeting law. Okay, it's not an emergency. We know snow is going to happen, right? Okay, there's supposed to be times where you designate people to make a decision and you trust that they're going to make the decision appropriately. And that's okay. It's supposed to happen that way. County commissioners don't get on the phone to decide when the plows go out. Okay, they delegate somebody to make those decisions, and you should too. Okay, so let's say you're a supervisor, you get a call from the neighbor saying there's a problem. It's not an emergency problem, but it's a problem. Well, you're not the road manager, but the other guy is, the other supervisor. So you call that road manager, you say, here's what I was told. That's it. Hang up, no problem. Okay. You're relaying something. It's one way. It wasn't an exchange about what to do or how to do it or should we do something. None of that. It was, I'm just reporting this to the other person. One way, we're okay. All right. There are also other exceptions for closed meetings. A closed meeting always starts as an open meeting. So you never post a meeting saying, well, we're going to have a closed meeting on this day. You may note that you're going to close the meeting, but they always start as an open meeting. During a closed meeting, the public is excluded, and it's only for certain reasons. Okay. And I'll go through those in just a moment. But you have to point to the statute as a board with specificity. You will have to give the statute. We're closing the meeting under chapter 13D.05 subdivision 3B. You have to be that specific. Okay. And the town board has to say it, oddly. Okay. It's not supposed to be your attorney or the clerk or something like that. Then you can exclude the public. You could exclude the clerk and the treasurer if you want. Okay. And the town supervisors can have the discussion they need about that topic. But the meeting can be closed only for that topic that allowed it. But during a closed meeting, there are never any minutes, because everybody has a right to the minutes, and to keep minutes would be silly if we were to do that and then just let people read the minutes of what we did in our closed session. Okay. But there are some audio recording requirements for most of the closed meeting exceptions. Okay. And I'll mention those as we go here. If you don't have an audio recorder, yeah, you could go buy one. That's a town expense, and that's okay. Otherwise, every one of you who has a cell phone, smartphone, you have an audio recorder. Okay. You have to make sure it's in a position able to catch what's being said, but there's free apps available to keep an audio recording. You're going to keep that. It's not public. You're not going to hand it out, but you're supposed to keep that in case there's questions about what did you do in that meeting. Then you're going to play it for a judge who's going to say, yep, you stayed within the boundaries. You're just fine. Okay. So here's the common exceptions for a township. There are others, but for a township, these are it. If what you want to do isn't on this list, chances are you cannot close the meeting for it. Okay. Notice there's no exception for saving someone's feelings. There's no exception for hiring somebody. There's no exception for interviews to hire somebody. These are things that people just think, well, they happen in private. Can't we just exclude the public? No, not if you're going to do it as a town board, a quorum, having the exchange. It's about your town business. No, can't do it. Okay. So here's the exceptions. The attorney-client privilege. If your township has been sued or you believe it's about to be sued in good faith, you can't just say we're about to be sued all the time. Okay. In that case, you may close the meeting to consult with your township attorney. No minutes, no recording. Okay. If your clerk and treasurer don't need to be there, they shouldn't be there. Okay. Because arguably they're not the board in the way the supervisors are. Okay. But it's also just good sense not to involve more people than need to be involved. Because any of them saying something can waive your confidentiality or privilege. So don't do that. Okay. Next is employee review. So if you have employees, this is not board members, this is employees. Okay. People under the control of the township board, you can close a meeting to review that person's performance. No minutes, but you do audio record. Okay. And at the end of it, you come out with a written report. Could be at the next meeting. Okay. But you got to do a written report generically about the performance review. Okay. You don't say terrible things about an employee. Okay. In these, you have to be cautious about what you write. And if you don't know what to write, you get the help of somebody who knows how to do this. Don't do it yourself. Okay. Next, again, with employees or people under the control of the board, it's preliminary consideration of allegations of wrongdoing. So it's alleged somebody did something wrong and they're an employee. So any elected official, this doesn't work. Elected clerk, elected treasurer, any supervisor, this doesn't work. Any consideration of wrongdoing for them happens in an open meeting. Okay, but an employee, you can close it to consider the allegation. It's not to actually do the discipline or decide on discipline. It's to consider, hear the allegation, and then decide as a board, are we going to move forward with investigation? Are we going to move forward with discipline? Once that decision's made, the meeting is reopened, and then you should work with your town attorney on how you're going to handle that employment issue. A few townships have union employees, and if you do, you will have labor negotiations at times. You may close at certain times for labor negotiations. I'm going to leave it at that for this one. Real estate, townships buy and sell real estate. You have to set your pricing, right? Here's what you're willing to pay, or here's what your bottom line is to sell. It wouldn't make any sense to do that in an open meeting, and you don't have to. Okay, so you close the meeting, you audio record it, and you set your asking prices, and you authorize somebody to take care of this business without the board having to convene again. Because remember, you don't have an exception that lets you just outside of a meeting have the board members say, yes, we're going to take that offer, or no. Okay, you're going to have to probably give somebody authority. Those are your open meeting law exceptions that allow you to close a meeting. Okay, if it's not on there, assume you can't do it, and do not try to close the meeting. Okay, if you get to those situations, get help from your attorney, get help from us. We'll do the best we can. Okay. Emergencies. I mentioned this earlier. An emergency is something that is an imminent threat, a threat right now to the health or safety of people. Okay, not just property, but people. For townships, I've never encountered a situation that we have an emergency and it's not weather related. It is not an emergency because we forgot to pay a bill or something like that. It's an emergency when we had a washout, we had power lines down, we had a tornado or wind problems, or we have flooding or something like that. Now you have an emergency. It's not a closed meeting. It just means that the board members can call each other or meet at the roadside or wherever they want to meet to take the actions needed to address this emergency. Now, clerks, I mentioned earlier, you don't have to take minutes. If they're getting up in the middle of the night to go to the roadside and decide what to do, you do not need to get out of bed and go take their minutes. I would just say no, because they can take their minutes and tell you them, and you can put them in a format for them and all that. The point being, supervisors, you have this ability in a true emergency to go deal with it, but keep notes of what you're doing, explain why it's an emergency. So a court coming back later will look and say, oh, okay, I see what you did and why. That phone that you all have in your pocket, take photographs of what you're looking at. That can say so much to people about here's why we did this and why and how we addressed it. Okay. And your meeting at that point is limited to addressing the emergency. Don't go beyond that just because we're in an emergency setting. Okay. So we're going to talk about how you comply with this thing. Okay. We talked about what's a meeting. Okay. And I do see some questions. I'll try to grab them here as I get through this a little bit. Okay. Kim, I see yours. All right. So a regular meeting, we have regular meetings and we have special meetings. Okay. Notice there's not an emergency meeting. Okay. That's something you do within these other contexts. Okay. And then there's a continued meeting at the bottom. Regular meetings are things that the board puts on a schedule, usually at the what we call the reorganization meeting, which is an early meeting sometime after an election. Okay. And excuse me. So you put a schedule together of your regular meetings. It can be every second Tuesday of the month, except for certain days that doesn't work or whatever. And then that gets filed with the clerk. Once that's done, no other notice is needed for a regular meeting. Okay. But it's common and it's a good idea that you put that schedule up where the public can see it at any time they want. So you should have a posting board, a posting place, and you put that schedule up. And you can amend it at different times, okay? But that schedule goes up for people to see. That's a regular meeting. At a regular meeting, the board can take any action that it's lawfully able to take. It does not require an agenda. People will fight about this, but no agenda is required. And even if you have an agenda, the board can take any action they want. They can change it, throw it away, do something different, whatever they want to do, okay, at a regular meeting. A special meeting is different. A special meeting is anything outside of the regular meeting schedule. Okay, remember you can adopt a regular meeting schedule and amend it as you go through. Okay, but if you need a meeting abruptly for something, this is hey, we forgot to pay a bill. Hey, I think we have to come in and talk about something. Now you have to give posted notice of the date, time, place, and list the things you're going to do, the purpose. What things are you going to do? And you have to be somewhat specific. You can't just say whatever business comes up. You have to be specific. So it tells people, here's why they're meeting and should I show up to hear what they're going to do? Okay. You may have to mail notice of a special meeting to people who file a special request. Okay. And the law says that the posting or the mailed notice must be at least 3 days before the date of the meeting. Okay. The way the law works, 3 days here means 5-day rule. Okay. 5-finger rule. The 3 days in that phrase are the middle three. Okay. Those are the 3 days that the statute talks about. The first day is your day of posting. Okay. Because of another law, we don't count the day of posting as an action item. And then if you look carefully at that phrasing, at least 3 days before the date of the meeting, meaning we don't get to count the date of the meeting. That's why we're up to 5 days when we do a special meeting notice. Okay. So if you follow that 5-day rule and you post in your posting place, you're fine. You can have that special meeting. There's some particulars around weekends and holidays, but it gets too into the weeds for this kind of thing. So if you aim for 5 days, you're good. You should be just fine. Now, a continued meeting is the last type. Okay, a continued meeting is the type where it could start as a regular, it could start as a special, but it means that you get to the end and you don't want to end the meeting. You don't want to adjourn, and you could choose not to. If the board as a group votes to continue this meeting, so the motion would be, I move to continue this meeting. And then you give a specific date and time and place. Now, the board, if they approve this, they can come back at that continued meeting time without any notice required and resume. It's the same meeting. Okay. It's the same set of minutes because it's really the same meeting, and they continue their business. The ways that this is most often used is you get sealed bids in and you're not sure that you don't want to make a decision that night because you shouldn't. Okay. You want to do some research and go into it a little bit, but you don't want to come back the next meeting, 20 days later, even 5 days later. You want to come back tomorrow. So you continue that meeting until the date, time, in the place specified tomorrow. The only notice required is what you just said. Okay. If people want to be there, if they want to know, they're supposed to stay for the meeting. You can argue about whether that's fair or not, but this is a tool that townships may use to have meetings faster than 5 days. And that's why it's valuable and important. But you can't just continue every meeting so that you never have to post a meeting or post a regular schedule. Don't try to do that. Again, that would be seen as trying to subvert the open meeting law. So don't try something like that. Okay. Couple questions here. Jody, I'm not sure, defined situation. I think we were talking about clerks, treasurers, and supervisors, and I don't know how much I can get into that today, but if you give me details, I might be able to. Kim, in the budget meeting, we discussed clerk and treasurer salary. Would that fall under employee evaluation? Well, if the clerk and treasurer are not, if they're elected, they are not employees. Okay. Remember, an elected clerk, an elected treasurer is not an employee in the sense that people usually think of it. Okay. Yes, the supervisor's set compensation. That's a supervisor or board duty. So they will decide that, and it would probably be in a budget meeting. Okay. But again, it doesn't change anything. That would have to be in an open meeting. There's no opportunity to close that meeting if that's what you're getting at. Okay. If they're an appointed clerk, appointed treasurer, meaning they're never elected anymore, the voters said they're always appointed, they're in the nature of an employee situation. And yes, in that sense, they're employees. Okay. And you could do the employee evaluation to close a meeting if that's what you're talking about, but you would not discuss budget and salary in the employee review. That's something outside. That's to do with money. That's different. That's going to be in an open meeting. Another question, what's the best way to get background information on the issues on the agenda? I received my first agenda with names of residents, no reference to what they're coming before the board for. So that's really based on what the town board itself requires or asks for people to have comment. So if they're going to have public comment, I think that's what you're saying. If the town says, well, we'd like to know what's the topic, people could put it down. But if they don't put it down, chances are you still have to listen to them. Okay, that's probably the best thing to do, even if it's frustrating. It kind of goes to their credibility or how much they're going to be listened to. That's their fault if they don't help you to understand what they're coming before you to hear about. Okay, so that can be something on the board that you ask for. Well, Can we ask what they're going to talk about so we have some sense of it and can maybe get some background beforehand? People could refuse to provide it, but ultimately it's a board decision on how you want to approach it. Does posting on the township website satisfy? No, it does not. Kim, good question. You have to post on a posting board. If you don't have a posting board, something available to the public to look at any time, okay, then the law says that your posting place is the front door of the meeting space, the regular meeting space. So towns that don't have a town hall that regularly meet, say at the township's clerk's house, well, the town clerk's house just became the posting place, probably to the disappointment of the town clerk's spouse. So get a posting board. Yes, you should spend some money on this. Your regular meeting schedule goes up, the special meetings would go up, all these things at clerks, you're gonna have to post about elections, you're gonna wanna post there anyway, okay? So that's important to do. But websites are not currently a way to satisfy that requirement. And keep in mind, not everybody has the means, not everybody has the interest to get online. When does the township make decisions versus the law? Well, we always have to start with a statute. And I'm not sure about what you mean by deference. So if the law provides it, that's the procedure, that's the rules we'll follow. If the courts have interpreted it, we may be able to get some idea of how it's looked at, okay? But within when you're given powers, I mean, there's some boundaries within which the board can decide how to do something and what to choose. So there's always some kind of discretion in those things. Can township return to an elected position of clerk and treasurer? Yes, the township voters can choose to go to appointed or return to elected. That's up to them to do that. Okay, so we're going to jump into the next part here. Okay, penalties. Supervisors, this is where you want to pay attention. Okay, this is one of the very few places where you can have individual liability, individual action against you, because the legislature said this is so important that we are not just going to put it on the township. Usually the township's going to be kind of a liability shield for people, but not here, okay? Any person may bring an open meeting law claim. They do not have to be a landowner. They don't have to be a resident. They've never had to attend your township meeting at all. It doesn't matter. Anyone can do it. The official is personally liable. It's only the supervisors though. Clerks and treasurers, in your role, you're not subject to this. Now, clerks, treasurers, what if you're appointed to a committee and you vote on that committee? Well, now you're subject to this, okay, for your work on that committee, not for the supervisor's work, but for your work on the committee. The penalty, $300, up to a fine of up to $300 per violation, okay? And we've seen cases, city cases, where the plaintiffs have alleged 45 violations of the open meeting law. Now in that one, I think there were 20 some, up to 20 some that were found as violations, and I don't think they imposed the full 300 in each of those, but in some of them they could. And that's a personal fee, okay? The town cannot pay it. Insurance will not pay it. That's personal on you supervisors. This is why you pay attention. This is why it's important, okay? If you violate it 3 times in separate actions, you lose your office automatically. I'm not aware of this happening, maybe once that this has happened, but it's really pretty hard to lose your office because it has to happen in 3 different cases by courts. And as you know, court cases take quite some time to proceed. So it can take literally years to get through 1 set of violations, much less 3. The bigger thing, the scarier thing, is that the plaintiff who wins is entitled up to $13,000 in attorney's fees. It's possible the township could pay for this, but remember, if you have the fee against you, you probably can't vote on whether your township pays this because it's a conflict of interest. Insurance may not pay for this depending on the circumstances. So this is serious. Pay attention to it. And I want you to be just a little bit scared of this because this law is so easy to deal with, okay? I know folks hate it. We have this question, this set all the time where people don't like this thing. Remember, you can't get in trouble if you slow down, if you wait, if you don't talk to people between these meetings. Set up times where you can interact with each other at the meetings, and beyond that, people have individual authority. We're going to talk about that after the break, okay? So let's take a short break here, and we are going to come back. It'll give it 5 minutes, okay, folks? All right, welcome back, everybody. Okay, I've got a couple questions in the chat. We'll take those here first. Commingling township business on your personal cell and email. I'm going to take them separately. It's more difficult and costly for a township to not to separate the phone calls, because then you have to have separate phone, or you have to have separate cell phone and paid for by the township. It's not necessarily a problem. It's okay to do. The email is so inexpensive and easy to separate, and you should, in part because you're creating data whenever you do an email, and townships do have data retention requirements. So, and that's a big topic all on its own, okay, for clerks and treasurers primarily, but supervisors, when you create data too, emails, whatever it is, those are supposed to get to the clerk to be filed and kept. So I recommend that you get a separate township email. Many townships do. They may use Gmail or Outlook.com or use something reputable. Okay. You can get your own domain names if you really want to do something like that. You don't like clerk at belgradetownship.gov or something like that, or .org. But otherwise, use something. I'd recommend Outlook.com is a Microsoft product, and I anticipate it will be around, right? Gmail is another good one. Hotmail isn't very prevalent. Both Hotmail and Yahoo, we see those, but they've had a lot of security issues. So I personally shy away from them, but that's a personal opinion. Okay. So yeah, I would separate those on email in particular. And also because if there is a problem, people, let's say get into a lawsuit, there's a process of discovery, and discovery can include access to your email. So if you don't want your personal stuff in there, don't use your personal email for business purpose like this. Keep it separate. Try to keep that clean. Okay. Action can be brought by anyone. So what I meant by that was an open meeting law action. So anyone can bring a claim that some town or city or county or whatever violated the open meeting law. But I think, Jody, your question on comment on the parking access situation, that seems more like public comment. And when we're in a public comment setting, so if you have public comment at your board meetings, you cannot limit it based on residency. That's a good question. Anyone who shows up and is there can talk. So if you guys have a sign up sheet or something, that's good. That's all fine to do. It should let anybody talk. If I show up there and want to talk, I've never been to your township, right? But if I want to talk, I have just as much right from a public standpoint as anybody else does. Okay. All right. So we'll get back into it here. So conducting public business. We've already talked about that there's this public trust, and you have to take that oath, and there's laws that apply to you, and there's laws that require you to do certain things. You have duties and responsibilities that go along with these powers. You're a public servant when you do this, okay? One of the things that you have to pay attention to is acting in a timely fashion. People look to you to make decisions, and you need to do that sometimes within a time limit. So for example, townships that engage in planning and zoning activities. So you have a land use ordinance. There's something called the 60-day rule that you must come to learn, because towns have to make decisions or take actions on those zoning requests within 60 days, or they're automatically deemed approved. So there's serious consequences for not following some of these things. But beyond that, people just want to know, where do they stand? And you may have to make a decision. Okay. When a town board acts, it acts by one of three ways: motion, resolution, or ordinance. And those are listed in order of formality from least formal to most formal. So a motion is your discussion at the board. It's purely verbal. You just discuss, and you have a motion of some sort, and you have a vote, and then you come to some conclusion. It's reflected in the minutes. You should put reasons in those minutes. Take the time to put some reasons that support your decision, okay? And then you move on. A resolution is a little different. A resolution is a written document. It starts with a series of whereas statements. Whereas statements are, whereas we believe this to be true, whereas this law gives us this authority or duty. These are the things that lead up to the bottom of, be it resolved, we are doing this. Okay. Now, occasionally a statute will say you must act by resolution to do something. Okay. Others say nothing at all about how you act, which mechanism you use. Okay. If it says you have to do an action by resolution, then act by resolution. Okay. For example, if you want to accept a gift from someone, the township may do that. The board can accept it by simple majority vote, but it has to do it by resolution. So you have to have something written to say, here's the gift offered, and here's where we can accept the gift, and here's our vote on it. Therefore, be it resolved, we accept the gift. And then you keep that. Okay, and it goes to the clerk, who keeps it on file, and it becomes part of that data. The most formal is an ordinance, and it's a little bit different than the first two, because the first two are they're township board actions, but they don't necessarily have the same effect as other folks do as do ordinances, because an ordinance is a local law. Okay, it's like the legislature passes statutes. Well, you pass ordinances, and you can criminalize certain activities. You can prohibit things or make people do certain things based on the ordinance. And it's the most formal of them. Okay, so it has to be written, and it has requirements. That's the next line here. You have to publish ordinances. Once they're adopted, they must go in a publication. Can't go on the website, okay, at least not yet. And then they have to be filed. They have to go into the clerk's book of ordinances, and you have to put them in the appropriate place. So one place is the clerk, okay, keeps them, but also whether you knew it or not, every county has a law library where people can go and get free access to legal documents, statutes, court cases, all this stuff, okay? Well, all of those, nearly all of them, have local government ordinance books. And so you're supposed to take a copy of that and put it in the local ordinance book for your township. If you go there, you may find that book there, and you put a copy in, and you create an affidavit, okay, and sign it that says, I'm the clerk and I put this in this location on this date. And you keep that affidavit to say, look, we did the right thing. Even if somebody steals the ordinance out of the law library, we did what we were supposed to. Okay. Now the world is deemed to have understood that you passed this ordinance, and you can start enforcing it. Whenever we act in these ways, remember I said motion, resolution, ordinance, all of these presume it's a group, because there's no individual authority in a township. Before I was saying, well, you got to delegate. You may have a road manager and somebody has to decide things between meetings. That's true, but that's not what I mean here by individual authority. Okay, individual authority is, as a starting point, no one can just do things on behalf of the town as a supervisor, even the chair. Okay, the chair is just another supervisor. The chair has the only remarkable power that the statutes give to the chair. Well, there's two of them. One is you can declare a pandemic and then have remote meetings. We've been using that one for a while now. But the other is that you collect the feet of dead animals. You as a chair get to collect the gopher bounty feet. But beyond that, there's no other authority given to a chair. Okay, you act as a group. So you have to have your quorum. You have to have a vote of some kind, and there has to be a majority vote to take any motion, resolution, or pass an ordinance. Okay. Occasionally, a statute will say you have to have a 2/3 or a unanimous vote to do something. There's not many though. Most cases, it's just simple majority. Okay. So when I talked earlier about delegating powers to people between meetings, I still want you to do that. There should be a road manager. It doesn't have to be a supervisor, but it could be. Okay. Somebody to go to between meetings as a resource for the contractor, the employees, to say, well, what do we do in this situation? And that person is given some ability to make decisions and come back to the next meeting and report. Here's what we did and why. And if you want something different to happen, we have to change the authority, limit it, or expand it. So for example, no supervisor has the ability to spend any money on their own. Okay. Can't do it. You act as a group. But what you could do is you delegate something to your road manager and you say, you have $1,500 of spending authority to address issues that have to come up between meetings that we can't do on our own. So the tire needs replacing on a town vehicle. Well, yeah, we expect that to happen. We're going to do it. Go take care of it so you can get back out there, especially with a plow, right? You have to be out there. Okay, so certain things you may be able to do that. If you have a fire department, you may need to give some spending authority to a supervisor or to a fire chief if you trust that person to do this. Okay, and then they can make the repairs or things that are needed to serve that right in the moment that aren't necessarily an emergency, but are urgent, and still let your township operate without all of you having to talk and violate the open meeting law. Okay. There was our short break slide. I did it one late, but there we go. All right. What about policies? Well, policies would probably be in the nature of resolutions, because policies should be written. Otherwise, I don't know what the policy is, and neither do you. And it's probably in that nature. If you're talking about board policies, I guess a policy could be put in the context of an ordinance, but I'm not sure what you would do and why. An ordinance is usually done because you want to make something punishable by fine, or take some action if a person doesn't do something, a parking ordinance, or a right-of-way management ordinance, or something like that. I'd recommend the resolution format. How do we know what's the appropriate place? Well, you'd start by a motion, okay? But this is where, when I said earlier, as a starting place, as a new officer, ask, where is this power? What lets us do this? Okay. Jeff showed a book when he did his introduction of resources, the town manual, the 2020 town manual. Okay. We usually update that every year. We just haven't been able to, basically because of a pandemic. But that's a kind of summary document. Okay. It's not terrible. It's, 150 or so pages, but it's broken down into discussions of different powers and different things that a township will often do. I would recommend that book as the best starting place. And you can order that and we send it out. Again, this should be a township purchase, not your purchase. And for $10 a piece, it's a no-brainer to buy 5 or 7, whatever you need, for people to understand that they have this resource right there. They don't have to talk to each other if they can find it in that. Okay, the other place is on our online library. There's 110 documents on there that Carl and I maintain. Some of them are on specific topics. Okay, or call me, please. That's exactly what we're here for. You email, you call, we will try to point you in the right direction. Okay. Most times though, you're just going to act by motion. I'll try to show you if you have a special restriction to act by resolution or ordinance. Okay. County does not need a copy of all resolutions. There's certain things you'll file with the county recorder when it has to do with land. You'll sometimes file there. But again, you are not little brother to the county. So no, you don't report to them, just as they don't report to you. Okay. Try to break that idea from your mind that you answer to the county. You will work with each other. Clerks, you'll work with the auditor in the election context a lot. Okay. They'll train you, they'll help you, but the management is down to you when it comes to the town election. Okay. Town boards, you guys select your election judges, not the clerk. You share in that. Okay. Treasurer, you may need to work with the county assessor in some ways. Okay. They work with each other, but not for each other. Okay. Municipal contracting law. Here's our next big section of good governance, Minnesota good governance law, kind of that blue sky good governance law. The municipal contracting law is found in statute. You could read it, and I think a lot of you you'd understand it. Excuse me. You'd be able to see kind of how it works. The only issue is there's a lot of detail to it, and so it's not fun to read. It works in ways that I think are pretty simple. It's a 3-bucket idea based on the value of the contract. Now, it doesn't apply to every contract, though. It only applies to certain contracts. It's contracts where you're buying and selling stuff. Okay. I want 1.4 here. Okay. So, like the open meeting law, this is intended to create public trust in government via an orderly process. It protects public money, which is something people always care about and track because it's their tax dollars, and we disagree about how it should be spent sometimes. This thing also is intended to reduce fraud and abuse by following procedures. The more you're going to spend, the more regulated you're going to be. In some ways that are not comfortable. Okay, you're going to lose choice as you do this more and more. It applies to the sale or purchase, so buying or selling of supplies, so the things that you need, materials, equipment, or the rental thereof, So buying or selling stuff, that's what this comes down to in that phrase, okay? When you buy or sell things that the township owns or is going to use, or the construction, alteration, repair, and maintenance of real or personal. Excuse me. I've done this training for 6 years, I think now, and every year I get a cold right at this time. So it's like a curse for me. All right. So buying and selling things. And then when you're going to contract for services, to make something, to repair something, or to build something. But it doesn't apply to your contracts for tax help, your accountant, or an architect if you're going to get help designing something, okay, or an engineer. You're going to use engineers as you work with your roads. Maybe the county engineer is a resource for you, okay, or attorneys. You don't have to go through this thing when you deal with those, okay? So here's our 3 buckets, all right? Our 3-bucket system. We're going to start at the bottom and move our way up. At the bottom, we're the least regulated. And this says, okay, if your contract is expected to be under 25,000, and it works on a per contract basis. Okay, so there may be many parts to something, but we're taking each contract itself, and it doesn't matter for time. Okay, time affects it only in what's the value of this thing. All right, it could be a 5-year contract, and if it's under 25,000, we're sitting in that bucket. Okay, so in this bucket, we're in the direct negotiation. You don't need bids, you don't need written quotes. We're going to talk about those next. This is just call up who you want or advertise however you want. Again, as a board, you're going to make the decision. It's not one supervisor making the decision. Okay, but everybody can try to solicit how they want. And then you get together as a board and make a decision. Who are you going to contract with and how? What are the specifics? Okay, and when we're trying to estimate these values, it's a good faith best guess. And you probably have some idea. If we're going for a vehicle, a new vehicle, we are probably not under 25,000, okay, for the stuff you guys need. We're probably in the middle or top bucket. If you're doing certain contracting for road work, maybe you're in that bottom bucket, depends on how much you have to do and what you have to pay. Okay, you can always look back at what were the past experiences for service contracts and try to guess what it would be. Okay, but it's good faith. What do we think it's probably going to be? And that's how we decide which of these 3 we use, because you don't actually know until you start asking for quotes or bids, or you get to the end of the contract. So this is a forward-looking idea. Okay, so bottom, least restricted, direct negotiation. You can get their quote, negotiate. You can use quotes. You can use offers. I'm going to use offers here, and try to negotiate it down among them. All that's fair game. Okay, all that's fine. Middle bucket. This is what we call written quotes. Okay, and the written quote bucket is between 25,000 and 175,000 of expected value. Now you could use sealed bids. Okay, we'll talk about that next, but it's inconvenient and you're restricted in some ways you may not want to be. Okay, so in this, you have to try and get at least 2 written quotes. So you call around, you may advertise in any way you want, but you don't have to do it in any particular way. They have to be from different vendors. It can't be, well, hey, one dealer, give me 2 quotes for the same thing. It's not going to work. That's kind of a silly thing. Instead, you're going for competition. The idea here is it's more money. We want to get more understanding of what the market should be and what value we can get. Okay. So you keep those, you get those 2 written quotes, at least 2 if you can, and you keep them on file. I believe it's 2 years. It's not a problem if you keep them longer though, okay? But you hang on to them. It's okay to get more. It's okay to negotiate once you get them. It's okay to go back to one you'd rather work with and say, hey, this one gave us a lower quote. Can you match it? We prefer to work with you. All that's okay. If you can't get 2, you've tried and you absolutely can't get 2, okay. You take one and you put in your minutes, we tried, and here's what we tried to do. Here's who we called. Here's how we advertised. No one wants to do this, okay? And then you just put it in there and you take the quote you've got if that's what you want to do, okay? Now in the bottom one, you do not have to take the cheapest. You have some ability to judge what you want to do. But if you're going to take take one that costs more, you should probably have good reasons. And there may be really good reasons. Okay. So for example, you go out and you get quotes, and one of them is offering this package of services to you, and the other isn't offering the same. Well, maybe you want this one because you don't want to contract for all of them in the way they're talking about, or maybe you do. Okay, you can choose. It doesn't have to be apples to apples when you're in these bottom two buckets. So you have more flexibility. Okay, that's okay. Not a lot of restriction there. Okay, this is different than when we get to the top one. When we get to the top one, if a contract's expected to be over 175,000, you have to do it on sealed bid. And there's a procedure we'll talk about with this. Okay, with sealed bid, you are restricted, and it's the most restricted category. This amount actually just went up maybe 2-3 years ago. It used to be at 100,000 and more. And remember, it's contract value. Okay, so if you're buying an item and you're thinking, well, we're renting it, each month is only, it's less than that, obviously. Well, no, it's the total payment, the total contract. Or you say, well, it's under 175,000 a year, but we're going to do it for 2 years, and then it'd be over. That's more, because it's not based on per year here. It's based on at the end of this contract, what's the total you're going to pay. Okay, that's how we drop it into one of our buckets. All right, when you do sealed bidding, we're going to talk about sealed bidding for a few minutes here. The next couple slides, okay? First thing you have to do is decide what it is exactly that you want, and you have to build specifications, because you're telling the world with these specifications that are going to be published, here's what we're asking for. And to win, they would have to give you exactly, what's in here. And if they don't, you couldn't take them. Okay, so you have to be specific enough to give them a basis to give you a bid. But on the other hand, you cannot be so restrictive to prevent somebody from bidding on something. So what I find commonly is folks seem to have really strong opinions about the color of their implements: green, orange, blue, red, whatever it is. They've got something and everybody else is crap. Well, that doesn't work for government contracting at this level. Okay, you may be forced to take something that you don't want to. You have to allow for competition in the market. So you have to write the specs based on something that's quantifiable, okay, and not color, not emblems on the machine or something like that. Okay, you can use vendors to help you. So you can go to vendors and say, well, what are the specs for this thing and this thing? And we're aiming to get something. We're aiming to get the green and gold one, but you may have to allow for the market to compete, and you write the specs in a way that allows that, but certainly tells people what you're looking for. Okay, that's all right. It can be horsepower, it can be certain attachments, it can be certain features and functions, if those are things that everybody has available to them. Okay, you can also ask for bonds, and bonds are insurance. So you can get these, but if you put them in the specification, remember, we're still in this building the specifications. All right, if you're not specific enough, you're not going to get what you want. Okay, and if you're too specific, you're not going to let the market compete. Okay, so when we get to bonds, a bid bond is something that protects against a vendor coming in and withdrawing the bid. Okay, a performance bond is where they don't do what they're supposed to do, and you get money back from the bond, okay, from a third party, to cover the loss that they left you with. And last is a payment bond. If it's something where the primary contractor, somebody you're working with, is going to use subcontractors, you may want a payment bond from them. Payment bond guarantees that the subcontractors get paid, even if the general contractor doesn't pay them. So let's say the general contractor doesn't have the money, or they abscond with the money. Well, the subcontractors can come to the township directly and say, we're owed money, pay us. You already paid the general contractor. So you may want insurance that provides payment to any of these consequences here. And that's going to increase the cost of your contract. Absolutely. That's what insurance does. You pay a little bit for the promise of some kind of protection later, and that's okay. That's what you should do. Now, if it's a town road contract, those specifications have to file with the clerk. No particular reason why, other than the statute says it. Doesn't make any sense to me looking at it. I don't know the reason behind it, but there it is. Okay, so sometimes we run into these little kind of things. Things you wouldn't think you'd have to be specific about, you do have to have some specificity. So like look at gravel. The right type of gravel for roads has a particular set of definitions or specifications. You can't just say we want rock. Well, you're not going to end up maybe with at all what you intended to end up with. It might not work for what you want. It might harm your roads. And once you've done this, you're stuck with what you asked for. Okay, whatever's lowest, whatever the lowest pricing is, that's what you're going to be stuck with. Okay. Now on one of these things, you can always say no, but then you have to rebid and start over. So it's not an ideal situation to go through. When you get sealed bids, they are to remain sealed. They get received and they stay sealed, and then you're going to open them in a public setting, public meeting, where often the contractors show up because they want to see it and know what's going on. And this is to keep, again, public trust, that nobody is opening them and seeing what's going on or reporting to another contractor so that somebody gets a better deal. We've got case law about this. We've got criminal convictions where somebody tried to change a bid. They opened them, or they knew what the bid was, and they opened it and then they showed it to somebody else. Or they put in they had 2 copies of a bid from their preferred contractor, their buddy, and they put in the one that made sure their buddy won. Okay, that's the problem. People go to jail for that kind of stuff because this is big money and it's public money, and it's important to keep trust. So we open them in public and people can look at them. That's okay. Do not make a decision right away. Instead, you need time to review, because you wrote those specifications for a reason. And you can't award to somebody who doesn't provide you with all of the specifications in the promise. So they have to be what's called responsive, and you need time to review that. So you open them, you may say this is the lowest price, but we have to go back and review for responsiveness. And then the board can sort them. They can use experts, your attorney, whoever you're going to use. It could be in a meeting too, that you go through and go point by point. Does the lowest price, for example, offer all the things in our specifications that we demanded? If yes, okay, that might be the winner. Okay, we'll talk about why they might be in a minute, but if they don't, you have to throw them out. Okay, it could even be better. You know, you could ask for gravel road and they're going to promise a paved surface and you can't believe the price and you want to take it. Well, if you ask for gravel and they didn't offer it, you can't take it because they were unresponsive. They didn't actually meet what the specification said. All of those bidders, they have to be able to play on the same field. Okay, all apples to apples in this case. If there's changes or errors alleged, then you need an attorney, and you're not going to do anything until you work through that legal issue, because sometimes a change could be made if it's very obvious that there's a problem. If it's very obvious that it's something material and substantial, it's relevant to something in the specification, something in the price, something in what's offered. Okay, but you need help before doing that, and don't try to do it yourself, because you're going to get sued potentially by the one that should have won or the one that thought should have won. Okay, lowest responsible bidder. This is where sealed bidding is frustrating for townships, other than the procedures that you have to go through. You don't get to choose who you work with. Okay, because in sealed bidding world, the contract has to be let on the lowest responsible bidder. What's a responsible bidder? Okay, that's kind of where we're going to go here. The lowest part is pretty self-explanatory, or if you're selling something, the highest, right? But the lowest responsible bidder idea is, well, they're offering to do the work responsive. Okay, so that let's say they've promised to do all the things in the specs. They're going to give you your bonds. They're going to do it in the timeline you require, all these things. But now, are they responsible? Okay, a responsible bidder is one who can do the job. It is not one that you like or that you can get along with. It may be a terrible person, but there are people who are terrible people who are still very good at what they do. You may be stuck using one of those people. Okay, because you can't exclude them based on that kind of personal issue with someone. Responsible is, can they do the job? So let's say you're bidding out snow plowing services, and you have a lot of roads and you require a certain size of equipment because these are big roads and they have to be done in a certain time to be, to be reasonably done. Okay. And if you're in a contractor model, you don't have employees, you're going to go solicit these. Let's say you're going to use sealed bid, whether it's over 175 or you just decide you want sealed bid. Well, let's say you get into sealed bids and one of them is really low. It's a remarkably low price. And the other one is what you kind of expected. And as you start to review them, you realize that, well, the one that's lower price is lower because they don't actually have the equipment that the other one has. This one that's the low bid, they've got an F-150 with a blade and that's it. And you think, no, that's inefficient and ineffective for our roads. You can't do our roads with that. You need something bigger. Well, that may be a reason that they're not responsible. They can't actually perform the work. Okay, now change the fact pattern a little bit. Let's say they're the low bidder, but they're going to get the equipment. You might still have to take them. Okay, if they can do the job. Okay, if it's a building, let's change it a little bit again. It's a building, you're building something, and you have a number of bidders, and one of them has worked on government buildings before, and there's been problems. It was a problem in the city, it was a problem in another township. Maybe there's enough of a problem that they're not a responsible bidder. But if you're going to approach it that way, you have to work with your town attorney, because you're going to probably have to get more information. You may have to ask for assurances, or you may have to inquire about what's going on a little bit more, okay, before you declare somebody not responsible. This part carries a penalty. A town officer who violates this is guilty of a misdemeanor and must leave office. Okay, I guess if you're looking for an early exit to office, misapply the contracting law, this part of it anyway. But I've never seen anybody do that. It's important because, again, public trust in what you do. There's a lot of money usually involved here, and it's important to follow through with these things. Okay, and if the contract is made in violation, the bidder who won doesn't get all of this. They may be paid for the value of what they already did, but the rest of the contract is void. And it doesn't mean that they're going to make any profit off of it either. It may be just cover their costs kind of a thing. Okay. The town still have to pay for the work that's completed. That's where I mean that you may have to pay for some of it. Any losing bidder can bring a challenge. Any taxpayer can bring a challenge, and the losing bidder can recover costs. That one isn't so much of a threat to townships because usually our bidding process isn't very complex or big. It's not like we're making multi-million-dollar public works buildings most of the time. And so that's not a huge deal for townships. Okay. Exceptions. This has exceptions just like the open meeting law has exceptions. Okay. I'm going to take the bottom one first because it's the one familiar. It's the same standard as we had in the open meeting law. If there's an imminent threat to the health, safety, or welfare of the community, and for townships, again, this means probably weather, probably snow. You have a problem, you don't have snow plow because your plow broke or your contractor suddenly can't do the work. Well, yeah, you can go figure something out. You may be able to go buy a new vehicle, even though it's more than $175,000. Okay. You may be able to show up to the dealer and just do it because you have to be ready to do that work. This has to be a true emergency, not something self-created or that you allowed to happen. So for example, the plow's broken, let's say in a month from now, and we're not going to get more snow. You can't let it sit until next winter and say, oh, well, it's an emergency now. No, you knew it was broken. You had time to follow the contracting law, not a real emergency. Okay. Other exceptions. One is the state contract. What's called the state contract is actually the cooperative purchasing venture. Do not just go into a dealer and say, we want to buy, and they'll say, we'll give you the state contract price. It'll be fine. It'll not be fine. Okay. To get the state contract price, you must work through the office in St. Paul. You don't have to go there, but you'll work with them. What's called the cooperative purchasing venture. This is something the state set up because they buy certain things frequently, and so do counties and cities along with townships. And so they've pre-shopped pricing, and they've got what they're confident is good pricing on the things that are listed there. Most townships are already part of this, whether you knew it or not. And if you're not, it's like $20, $25 to become a member, and then you're a member forever. And you'll have access to a website where you can just look at the menu, and the board can basically buy off the menu. You don't have to go through any of the contracting stuff I just talked about. Okay. The idea here is that you're working between governments, because purchases between local governments and the federal and state governments are exempt. And that's what the state contract idea is. Okay. Joint powers, again, these are governments working together. When you do that, only one of them would need to follow the procedures that we talked about. So if you have a joint powers fire, for example, you may have many members, and I guess the joint powers group itself could do the work, but it could also be that one of the members buys something and only one of them needs to go through everything here. It's not that all of them have to do it. That would be duplicative. It would be wasteful. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. Another nice exception, the county road contract. If the county is doing road work and you have a town road that intersects with it, then you can latch on to the county's contract. You have to have the agreement of the contractor, but if the contractor will give you the same terms and conditions and same basis for pricing, you can go get that work done outside of the contracting laws. Okay. I don't know how often this is used, but it is available to you. Okay. And last, purchases between local governments. I mentioned that before. You can buy and sell among all governments freely without any of this stuff going on. Okay. We're going to shift from contracting to purchasing municipal property. Okay. And this means stuff your township already owns. How do you get rid of it? So there's a law that says no officer or employee shall sell to any other officer or employee any property owned by the municipality except under these conditions. This is something that means you as an officer, once you take that oath, you can never, ever, ever, under any circumstance or any exception, get your town's stuff. Okay. You just can't get it. There is no exception to this rule for an officer. So any supervisor, clerk, or treasurer, no matter how they got into office, whether you're appointed, elected, it doesn't matter. You will never be able to get your township stuff when it's sold. It could be computers that they've replaced recently, tablets. You can't get them. Your family can't get them. Your husband can't get them. Your wife can't get them. Okay. Anybody who lives with you or is financially connected to you, no, they can't get them. Okay. And this is again to protect public trust, because it looks terrible when an officer all of a sudden has some item of township property sitting on their own property. How did they get that? Why did they get that? Even if the price was fair, there's an idea that the procedure wasn't fair. Why didn't somebody else have an opportunity? So the legislature said it is just strictly prohibited. But notice that the prohibition is on the people who sell. It's not on the person who receives. So town officers, you can think, well, they want the old truck. We're going to sell it to that supervisor. Well, we're going to sell it to the supervisor's kid. That's okay, right? We're going to do that. Well, no, it's not okay. And in fact, the supervisor and the kid aren't the ones that are going to get in trouble. It's the people who decided to sell it who are going to get in trouble. So protect yourselves. Don't ever sell this stuff to any officer or employee. With an employee, there is an exception. There's a method to do that. If you use either auction or sealed bid, basically, okay, or an employee can get it. But if you're a clerk or a treasurer, you are not an employee. I don't care what circumstance you got into office, you are not going to qualify for this. And we often look at township stuff and we think, what could be so important that you want it that badly anyway? Okay, usually you can get it somewhere else. You can buy and sell from other townships all you want. Okay, chances are some other township has that stuff too. Go talk to some other township and maybe they'll sell to you. That's okay. It's just your township. You can't do that. Okay. Exceptions for things sold in the normal course of business. Cities seem to sell hats and sweatshirts and t-shirts about their community, and those are sold to the general public. You could buy those. Those are things that are like retail, and that's accepted from this. Okay. This is another that carries a criminal penalty. Okay, so we've talked about the things that carry criminal penalties, and this is one of them. And this is a misdemeanor. Okay, misdemeanor is, I believe, up to 90 days in jail and $1,000 fine. I want to go back on the contracting law. When you violate that one, that's a gross. No, I'm sorry, it's a misdemeanor. Okay, same thing then. Up to 90 days and up to $1,000 fine. And again, it's not that people are out there looking for township officers who are doing this, but these things come up when somebody's upset with you. So don't give them reason to be upset with you. All right, conflicts of interest. I touched on this earlier when we first talked about public trust and incompatibilities. This is a kind of topic all on its own. So the general idea that people have with this is it's a feeling of you got some advantage because of your position that you shouldn't have got. Okay. The law looks at it this way. When a person has a personal financial interest in a decision or contract in which they have a vote. Okay, so there's two types of these things. The statutory is the contract type, where there's a contract with the township and somehow an officer is involved. Okay, there's a law, you can go read it, you can understand here's what's prohibited and how and the exceptions. Okay, and then there's common law, which are any situation that doesn't involve a contract or some kind of agreement like that. Okay, we'll take the common law type first. It's a little harder to see. Common law means judge-made law. It means it's not in a statute. It's stuff that there's a problem, but there's no law on the subject, but courts can't overlook it. So they use what are their powers in equity or fairness to say, here's the rule we're going to apply because we can't let this go the way it is. There's no black and whites in this, and that's why it's hard. And true to legal form, we have factors to consider, okay? These are the 5 factors. I'm not going to read them because we're going to talk about examples. All right. So the first example, we've got a township in Rochester area, and it's a 3-member board. Okay, 3-member board in this township, and they have an establishment that's serving food and liquor, and they've been operating for some time. This establishment. Well, I told you earlier, the county is supposed to ask the township before granting the liquor license. Well, in this case, the county didn't, and the township didn't catch it for some years. So this place is operating. It's been successful. It's well liked. The township board finally is given this choice, and it goes to a public hearing. Should we allow this liquor license to continue because it gets reestablished every year? Well, the town board here's a comment, and the guy who lives across the street from the bar and restaurant gets up and says, that bar being there damages my property. I lose $40,000 a year or in value, excuse me. My property is devalued by it being there. He said some amount, okay? And the town board unanimously decides, well, we're just going to approve this because it's been acting. We don't want to put this out of business. It's somebody's livelihood. It's popular. So they allow it. Well, shortly after, one supervisor leaves the board, and guess who gets on the board but this guy who lives across the street. And the next year, the same thing comes up for a vote again. And they hear from the public and they have discussion. And this time, that new board member convinces one other board member to vote with him to deny the liquor license. So this bar and restaurant is now unable to do this thing that is a big part of their business. So naturally, they sue the township. And it's not a contract, right? So we're not in the statutory world. It's something else. So we're in this common law set of factors, and a court looks at it and they apply these 5 factors. The first is, what is the nature of this decision? Well, this decision is, it's kind of like a court. It's not legislative. They're not making rules about how people should act or something like that. They're considering one applicant's application and making a decision about it. So it's kind of a judicial, it's called quasi-judicial. Okay, that's the nature of the interest, or nature of the decision. Well, what's the nature of the financial interest? Because I've said before, for any conflict of interest, there must be a personal financial interest for someone. Well, the nature of the financial interest would be money, that this person who's on the board now said that he lost money because of this bar and restaurant being there. Okay, that's where he said it himself. It's not that anybody said he did. It may not even be true. It may not be that his property lost any value. But what matters is that he said it did. He believes it did. And he urged the board in prior years to deny it because he believed he lost value. That's the nature of the financial interest, okay? And people could disagree about whether they think there's a financial interest there, but a court said, yeah, that's a financial interest. This person said there was some money involved, and so he should have known that. Next, we have the number of interested officials. We need to know this because if enough officials are interested, we still, those people still get to make the decision, because we can't render the board inactive. We can't prevent a quorum from doing anything at all. So here we have only one of three who's interested. Okay, and the next question 4 is, well, do we need that person in order for the board to make some decision? So let's say we get rid of them. Can the board, or 2 people, can they still do something? And the answer is yes, they can. Okay, here, that's what the court found. Well, this guy should have abstained. Then he's not in play. Okay, he doesn't have a conflict of interest as he's going to affect in the town business. And these other 2 are a quorum, and they can decide. Okay. Now you may say, well, this one guy was going to abstain anyway. Got to put the right one down there. And in that case, it would have been deadlocked, and that would have been no approval for this. It wouldn't have been approved. But in this case, it would have gone back to the county because the town didn't really make any decision. Okay, in that case, and we still would have had the ability for this place to get its liquor license. Okay. The last factor is, are there any other available means to ensure the public interest? So is there any backstop? So if it's a planning commission, well, planning commission doesn't make decisions often. There's some things they might, but often they make recommendations. And in that sense, when they make a recommendation, there's a backstop of the town board that's really going to make the decision. So sometimes a court could say, yeah, they probably shouldn't, but we're going to let this happen because they weren't making the final decision. Or there's some other thing to ensure that conflict of interest wasn't controlling. Okay. For you guys, the simple way to fix this is by abstaining. You don't vote. If you don't vote, you have no problem in this situation. Okay. The decision in this is still valid if it would have been the same even without that interested member. So let's say that person, let's say that this interested guy voted, but the other 2 voted to grant it. Well, the courts wouldn't penalize him for the conflict of interest because really it was like no harm, no foul. There wasn't an actual harm. He shouldn't have done it, but it didn't hurt anybody. So they're not going to take matters into their hands and impose anything. Okay. Now this situation changes a little bit depending on the situation that you're given. So there was a watershed district case where you have, for example, 5 members on the board and 3 of them were interested. 3 of them lived along the proposed project. So they had a financial interest. It could have affected their property values. Well, as a court looked at that case, it considered, okay, well, how many do we have? How many are interested? Well, we have 3 out of 5 that are interested. And if we get rid of those 3, 2 isn't a quorum. They can't even do business. So the court said, in that case, those 3, even though they have a conflict, have to participate because there's no ability to push that anywhere else. And we're not going to deadlock or remove the power entirely from government. So when you get these, it really depends on the circumstances, and you need help. Call us, call your town attorney, consider the factors before you do anything. Okay. Statutory conflict of interest. This says, except as authorized, meaning there's going to be some exceptions. Okay. A public officer who's authorized to take part in any manner in making a sale, lease, or contract in an official capacity shall not voluntarily have a personal financial interest in that sale, lease, or contract, or benefit financially therefrom. If you violate, it's a gross misdemeanor. Gross misdemeanor is up to a year in jail and up to $3,000 fine, I believe, if I remember that correctly. Excuse me one moment. Okay, now this, so you don't tune out. Understand that you can't avoid this one just by abstaining. Abstaining doesn't fix anything for you, unfortunately, okay? This can apply to clerks and treasurers. The last one applied only to supervisors because they're the only folks that vote, right? But here we have a different situation. Okay, so because it says authorized to take part in any manner, and no court has interpreted what does take part in any manner mean. So clerks and treasurers, you have to be aware of this too. When you have a contract, we're talking any written or oral agreement between the township and somebody else. Okay, so if you are an officer, supervisor, clerk, or treasurer, and you're looking at doing something beyond the statutory duties, so you're going to do what we call extra work for extra pay. Well, that poses this statutory conflict of interest, even if it's not, if it's a written contract, like let's say you're a electrician and you want the job to install the wiring into the new town hall. Okay, well, that's a clear contract. You're going to work as a contractor, that kind of thing. But even if you're going to say, well, employ me as an employee, that's potentially a contract too. Okay, we don't write it out in the same way, but there's an employment agreement of some kind. So the cautious approach to this is that we treat all of those. Anytime you're going to do something extra for extra pay, we consider this, all right? And there's ways we're going to be able to do that and let you do what you want to do. But it's important to understand that when you're elected into office, supervisors, you're not elected to do any manual labor whatsoever. You're not elected to run the grader, be a firefighter, shovel out the walkway up to the town hall. It's nice if you do, that's very fine. Okay, but if you're going to do any of those things and you're going to get pay, we have to deal with the conflict of interest issue. Okay, it's not a duty of office. Likewise, clerks, you're often given extra things to do, and we should be able to cure that before you do them with the procedures we're going to talk about. Okay, if a contract doesn't require a competitive bid, meaning it's under 175,000, we can follow a process, and that process will let you do the work and get paid, and it clears it. And what we have is document, I'm going to tell you and write it down, document C6000, as in contracts 6000. That document on our webpage is there. It explains all of this rule about statutory conflicts, okay? But it has a sample resolution for the board, because this is done by resolution in statute, okay? And it has a sample affidavit. Now the board does the resolution, okay? So if you want to do extra work for extra pay, you'd have the board do one of these resolutions, and it says, we see that there's a conflict of interest. Here's the type of work we're talking about, and it's going to be for this rate. It's fair. They pass it without the person who's interested participating. So you sit out for that part. Then you do the work. Whenever you make a claim for payment, you submit the affidavit that we have prepared for you. You have to fill it in, okay? Don't just give it a blank piece of paper. You have to fill it in. If you know you're going to do this every month, fill out most of it and make 12 copies for the year, and then fill out the rest of it each month, okay? Make it easy for yourself. But we've done everything we could to make this so simple and fix a conflict of interest for you, but you have to do the paperwork. You have to do it, okay? C6000 on the webpage. Now, what we recommend is you're going to have a meeting pretty soon, and it's probably what we call the organizational meeting, where your board comes together and sets up how it's going to work for the next year, the meeting schedule, and who's what, who's the road manager, who's the chair. There's a list of things that we talk about. One of them should be this. If there's any chance that any of you are going to be doing extra work for extra pay, do one of these resolutions for each person. Remember, the supervisors sit out for their own, okay? But you put them on file, and it's generic. It's to do manual labor, such as shoveling, work around the town hall, whatever it is that you guys might do, you list in there. And then as needed, you do it, and you turn in your affidavit and you get paid. Okay. Now, if you do specialty work, you're the electrician, you're a plumber, you're a contractor, and you're going to do other work for the township. Okay, that's different. Make a contract, make a affidavit and resolution just for that. But the general work you're going to do around the town hall, do one of these for everybody. Keep it on file. Okay. Once you do that, you're going to be okay. All right. If you don't, and there's a problem, somebody's upset with you. Okay. This can come up. And when they call the state auditor, the auditor is well aware of these. They're going to ask for your affidavits and for your resolutions. Okay. This is looked for. So ensure that you do it because it's really pretty easy to do. Okay. We are ahead of schedule. So we're going to take another 5-minute break because I want to make sure that we don't leave some lag time between us and the next one. So we'll take another 5 minutes and then we'll finish out. And then I think we're going to have some time for some questions too. Okay, so let's pause there. And we'll be back in 5 at 11:01, please. Hello, everybody. All right, so we've done some of the kind of big modules that you have. And the big things we talked about were open meeting law. We talked about entering office properly, paying attention to laws and statutes that are going to govern what you do. And I also tried to remind you where you can get help. And if you don't know where you can get help, you call us and we'll try to connect you with that right spot. Okay. We talked about the contracting law and we talked about conflicts of interest. Those are the big places where you're going to see some claim that you did something wrong. Okay. In part because people have some ideas of what they are, like they get a sense of what a conflict of interest is, or then they understand that meetings are supposed to be open. Okay. But there are other things that can provide liability to a township, to a municipality. Okay. Because a township is a municipality, just like a city, just like a county. They're, again, just different levels of local government. If you get into one of these situations where there's a problem, folks might be alleging one of these two broad categories. Okay, either they're going to say you have a procedural problem, so you made a decision and you reached the wrong decision, or you didn't follow the process you were supposed to reach the decision. Okay, so we talked about that township road issue. Well, let's say you go through and you receive a petition and you properly notice the hearing, and then you hold the hearing. And then you decide you're going to create the road. I mean, we could do this as a vacation, removing a road too. Same idea, same concept. Okay, and then you come down to, well, we have to award damages to somebody, because a road, when we create a road, we're taking somebody's property and putting an easement on it. Okay, we're not taking the property itself, but we're saying we're going to put a public easement there. And because of constitutional concepts, we can't do that without paying people and giving them due process. So the town board decides, here's what the amount we're going to pay is. And then they're ready to do this. Well, somebody could come up and say, hey, I don't like that you made the road at all. And I'm going to say that you didn't follow the right procedure. And I'm going to say that you exercised poor judgment in deciding to have the road, and then you had poor judgment in setting the value of the property. Okay, well, that could end up in a lawsuit. And if it did, a court would look at all those things that they allege. And in the fact pattern I gave, you did all the procedures right. You went through every step, okay? And then they get to, well, you exercised poor judgment in deciding you needed a road. Well, that's a local decision for the supervisors about whether they need a road. That's not the decision of a landowner or the judge. That's something that they can't set aside on you, okay? But what about the valuation? That might be something where there's a better chance to challenge it, because people can disagree about the value of property. Okay, that's where a judge could come in and say, well, what evidence did you rely on setting the amount that you're going to pay per acre or whatever it was? Okay, those are procedural or decision-making claims, something like that. You didn't give somebody something that they were due. This could be open meeting law. That's a procedural claim. Okay, not following the contracting law in some way. If they're a contractor and they feel they didn't get an equal chance at a sealed bid, well, yeah, you might have a procedural or that you violated their rights. Okay, that's different than property damage, personal injury, which people understand. Something is broken, and people can see that and they understand that idea, and we get advertised to that in daytime TV and billboards. And are you injured? That's the other kind of thing that can happen. Townships own property. Often, and they control property when it comes to the easements that we just talked about. Township road easements are, again, typically not owned. You don't own the underlying land. You have an easement for the public's use. the public can do all kinds of things to those easements, and the town has a duty still to make sure that those roads are clear, okay, to protect people while they're on them. And that relates to personal injury of people or damage to property. So you may get, let's say, you get somebody who's, it's their land and they're hanging the ditch within the right of way. That's okay. They can do that. It's their property. We share that easement with them, and they can do that. But they can't leave hay bales on the right of way. That's a problem. So let's say somebody does this, and then a motorist is passing by, or some kid on a dirt bike or a ATV runs into one of these things. Well, now there's a question. Now there's a problem of property damage or injury, and that can come to the township because you're the deep pockets. Sometimes people think you're the deep pockets. Okay. And then it becomes a fight about, well, did the town have a duty to protect people on the roadway, for example? That could be a procedural thing to that extent, but then it could also be just personal injury and damage, trespass, negligence, something like that. Okay, and it could be questions about, well, did the town know that the bales were there? How long were they there? Did they see them, or their reason to believe they should have known they were there because they were there a long time? Or did it just happen and the town had no idea and they couldn't have fixed it? So all these things go into this question about, does your town have liability for something that happens to people? We also see these in just slip and falls at town halls or at parks. And there's sometimes protections for towns in those cases. Another big one we see are trespass, takings with trees. I'm going to warn you now, don't just go cut trees. You cannot just go cut trees. Okay. Karl did a wonderful presentation on our seminar webpage about that, and we have a resource dedicated to it in the library. These things come up, they're unbelievably expensive for trees. Okay, that's a property damage claim. Flooding, when you change a road, you can't just go putting culverts in or removing them because it changes water courses, and that can cause damages to people, and that's something the township may owe damages for. Okay, for those of you with employees, you have a whole other set of personal injury or harms that you could potentially be liable for in the course of that engagement with an employee. So these things are something you want to pay attention to. You use the resources you can. Again, don't do something unless you are confident it's the right thing to do, or you know your options to do something. Okay. All right. When we're talking about liability, to talk about personal liability here, we've only talked about one thing where you have personal liability, and that was the open meeting law for supervisors. You are personally liable if you don't follow the open meeting law in the course of your township business, right? Quorum of the town board, having an exchange about town business, open meeting law applies to you. If there's a problem, that could come to you personally. But everything else, civilly, is not personal liability. So that last page that I showed there, okay, if something's about procedure or decision-making, or there's injury to someone, it's not going to be a lawsuit or claim against you individually. And this is one of those, I don't want you to be afraid, because you shouldn't be on this. No one would take this job if you could get personally sued for something that happens that's really attributed to the township. That's why you're on a board as a group. You're exercising judgment with other people on behalf of a legal entity that is the township. So you're not going to have personal civil liability except with the open meeting law. Okay. The other exception being exceeding authority, but as long as you do your oath of office and you act within your authority, you're fine. I've never seen an issue with that one. Okay. You will have any liability for crimes you commit. Let's say you're a treasurer and you're a really good treasurer. You notice you're not going to have enough money next month, and you decide you're going to fix this, and you go rob the bank, and you put that money into the township account. Yeah, that's not a township action, right? You're going to be criminally liable for this. And of course, this isn't really what we see. When we see a crime in a township context, it is usually you dug in a wetland without a permit, which is a crime. Okay, that's a problem. Don't do this, right? You can't just go digging in a wetland and you say, well, it was a marsh. It was more of a marsh. All of this is wetlands for which you need a permit. You have to work with DNR to do certain things like that. Or you're on town business, you're driving a township vehicle, but you get pulled over for some traffic violation. That's a personal problem. The town cannot pay your fine or anything like that because those are crimes. Okay. Occasionally, not very often, but occasionally, a township officer will steal something from the township. And then there is also criminal liability on that person. In those cases, the township cannot pay for your defense. The township cannot pay your penalties if you have any, fines, anything like that. You are on your own in a criminal context. Again, it's so rare to see that. I mean, I can think of the times I've seen it. And it's on one hand, township, I think they're folks who are trusted in their community for good reason. They're trustworthy people. They're trying to do the right thing. Okay, and we have these laws that try to protect public trust in it too. So I don't want you to be worried about any of the civil stuff. Okay, let's say you get a knock on the door and you get served with a lawsuit, and there it is, black and white. It's your name. It's the plaintiff against you, and it's for something you did on your town behalf. They probably served you on a weekend, probably just to mess with you. Okay, because lawyers are mean, evil people. This is the kind of thing they do. What you're going to do is not freak out. Okay, because remember this part of the discussion, you are not liable for civil problems of your township. Instead, you're going to talk to, this is one of those things you do need a meeting. Okay, and you can tell other people in the township, you can send it to them. That's one-way communication. And you're going to put your town attorney on notice, let them know, and you're going to call your insurer. For most townships, NATA is the insurer. NATA is a government. It's a joint powers government of all you townships that you guys formed. Matt at our office, we help you with that. We administer some of that. And you're going to end up talking to us probably, okay, to help you with this and see if there's coverage for whatever's going on. But please don't freak out if something like that happens, okay? Because somebody's probably just trying to ruin your day. A lot of times they're just upset or they just disagree. It's unpleasant, but it's not about you necessarily, and it's not on you if it happens. Okay. All right. Winding down here, data practices. Data practices is the last piece of that broad good governance that we'll talk about. It is the idea that all government data is open to the public, except that it's really not. This is a section of law that if you printed it off, you PDF it, it's like 170 pages, I think now. So it starts with all governments open to the public. And then everything else after that is all the stuff that's not actually open to the public, because that's not really how it works. There's a lot of things that aren't open to the public. This law is difficult to deal with, to say it nicely, okay? Cities, counties, they all have to do this no matter where they are. Townships don't, okay? Townships in the metro area, the 7-county metro, you are probably a data practices government. So you have responsibilities under this. And for this, you're going to end up working largely with your township attorney. Okay. We have very basic information on this, but it's just not something towns have had to do. The reason is that towns are so small, they don't have employees. They aren't typically organized in the same way as cities and counties in the state. And townships traditionally don't do the activities that those other three do. We do roads and some basic public services or amenities, and that's about it. Okay, we do elections too. That's the other big thing. Okay, so this law, the legislature has exempted townships from the Data Practices Act if they are outside the Twin Cities metro area. That doesn't mean that you're just going to say no when anybody wants something. Okay, you're still going to work with people. Okay, but you have more time. You can say no to things, but you better have a really good reason for doing it. Like, you don't give out bank information, social security numbers, health or mental health information of any kind, anything like that. Don't do. You talk to your attorney, you talk to us. If it's about budget, if it's about what people make, yeah, everybody gets to see that, the top line. They don't get to see deductions, but they get to see what every employee, what every supervisor, clerk, and treasurer brought home in the last year. They want to see the copies of the claims that went out. That's fine. Okay, they get to see that. They should see it. The exemption is something that we guard carefully, because If the legislature decided everybody's going to have to deal with this, it's going to be really costly and really time consuming for townships, because in that case, folks can just demand just about anything and then they expect to get it. So please guard this carefully. You're going to say yes to most data requests. You're going to give things. You maybe have some rules. Okay, you may be able to charge something per page. If it's electronic, just send it. It doesn't cost you to send it. If it takes a lot of time to compile something, to find it all, you may charge something for that, but be wary of that. Your data is supposed to be organized enough that you can know where to get things you need. And we know that's not the case in all townships. There's a lot of shoe boxes full of records out there. Okay. So be cautious with this. If you are in a 7-county metro area and you're in a township, you are subject to this. You need to have someone designated as the responsible authority. That's the person who's going to carry this out. You have to have a written policy on it. You're going to have to administer it, and you're going to work closely with your township attorney on this. Okay. And I'll warn you, Karl and I just don't do this much. We're going to send you to your town attorney on stuff like this. Okay. Again, this is just, folks, give data. Don't say no unless you have a really good reason. You've talked to counsel, your town attorney, or somebody that can tell you this is something you don't share, or you redact certain things and then you share. Okay, that's the kind of thing that's important to safeguard. Okay. Townships have a lot of problems. Well, I shouldn't say a lot of problems. Some townships have problems with their neighbors, in particular when it comes to annexation. And this quote comes from a city mayor, okay, in a city in southeast Minnesota after a annexation fight. It was one in which the city was going to take a bunch of the township through annexation, which is a problem for townships. But townships aren't just communities on their own. They're communities across borders are usually connected to a city or other townships. You probably go to some central school wherever in that area you are. People have common understandings beyond these boundaries of these governments. And this was so divisive in this community that ultimately the mayor said, you know, this doesn't make sense. Yeah, we could take it and we want to take it, but to do this, it would destroy our relationships with other people. So just getting tax revenue probably isn't the best idea. And this is a good quote from him. And it's a good quote to remember for anything you guys do with each other within your township and outside of your township. So when I said you can talk to other supervisors, just not about town business, I'm not only saying you can, I'm saying you should. You should get to know people and create some relationships with others. Okay. Be cautious not to talk about town business, but you can get to know each other in other ways if you don't already know them. Likewise, other township officers outside your town, you should know them. The county units are something you may learn about as you spend some time in the township. Those are gatherings of towns. That's a resource for you to get to know other people, but you also work with those other towns just next to you outside of that. Talk to the city council members or city administrators in your area if you border one, okay, a city. They're somebody you have to interact with, likewise with the county. Focus on people, focus on trust. Go slow, ask questions and get answers. Don't be afraid of your other supervisors. If you're a supervisor, they don't always do everything right. And I'm fine telling them that. You can tell them I said that. That's just fine. I'm not afraid of that either. You know, we're here to help all of you do the job right. So, so I have one question so far in here, but others, we have some time. I believe we have 10 minutes. So we can spend some time doing some questions too. Question posed: if a supervisor is an election judge, they need to complete an affidavit. And this goes back to that conflict of interest, the statutory conflict of interest. And yes, a supervisor is not elected. Elected duty is not to serve as an election judge. It's possible if you're a supervisor that you can be appointed as an election judge. But if it's for pay, if you're going to make money, you need a conflict of interest waiver because it's extra work for extra pay. So please do those. And that can be part of your reorganizational meeting. It can be that generic one, the manual labor, operating duties on township equipment, and election judge duties as needed. That would be kind of the generic description that would go in that resolution. And then the officers can do those things without being concerned about a conflict of interest. Any other questions? We're all on mute, I bet. Not seeing any. So I'm going to stop the recording for now as we're paused here.
Will this
Oh.
PowerPoint be available? Yep. There's
Okay.
one in the Q&A too.
Oh,
so
we're
one
getting
more in
some
the
now.
chat.
Okay. All right. Does this have to be done each year for an election judge? The conflict of interest waivers don't have an expiration. There's nothing in the statute. At the very least, somebody should do one each term. Okay, so every time they're reelected, that's a new office. That's a new beginning. They get, you may have been elected to town office 20 times, no joke. Okay, we've got officers out there who are in that situation. Every time you get the certificate of election, every time you take the oath of office, every time you would do this resolution. Okay, our best practice recommendation is every year. Do it at the reorg meeting every year for everybody. It'll become old hat. It'll be simple. Chances are you can copy the last one and change the date, and that's just fine. But the idea is you've looked at it, the board has looked at it, and it's not stale. The court's not going to say, well, I'm not going to apply this because I don't think you guys are really aware of it. So do them timely, please. That would be the best idea. The oath of office form is on the website in the elections section. We've tried to break the information library into sections, broad sections of interest. Elections is one of them. There's a certificate of election. There's also a certificate of appointment. And this is for generically any of the primary officers. Okay. Primary officers means supervisor, clerk, and treasurer. The others are deputy clerk, deputy treasurer. And those are on there too. Okay. But for you folks who are the primaries, you'd use that certificate of election probably, unless you got appointed. And then the oath of office document is there too. Okay, oath of office can be administered by the clerk, and that's common, but it can be any elected official in the state is eligible to administer an oath, as well as any notary public. So you have a lot of options to do that. Can a township board vote to follow the Data Practices Act? I suppose it could, but I would beg you not to. It is extremely hard to deal with. It is extremely expensive to deal with. Don't do that, please. You will be inviting problems for yourselves. We've seen townships that inadvertently agreed to follow it and they got sued. So please don't do something like that. You don't need that law to help people get information. That was put there because places say no. And if you say no, yeah, you're going to run into problems. But if you're working with folks and you're trying to get them information, you don't need that law. Okay, use your judgment, use your township attorney, call us. We'll try to help you with this, but it would be, it's a terrible choice to try to adopt voluntarily the Data Practices Act. It is immensely complex. It takes a staff of people to administer. In the townships that are subject to it, they spend thousands every year on attorneys because it's not feasible for a clerk or treasurer or staff to administer it by themselves. So please don't. Can I refuse my pay? I suppose you could. Although there gets to be questions of, are you performing the job and what's the exchange? I guess I don't know why a person would refuse their pay. I guess you could. To me, it's always been a political gimmick. Whenever I've heard that, it's hey folks, I think this is a thing that's important and I'm going to refuse my pay. I guess you can. That's up to you. Nobody can force you to cash your checks. What you're going to find is that this is serious business, it's serious work, and you deserve money for it because there's a lot of demands on everybody's time. And it's a nice idea that everybody should just volunteer, but these things are complicated and they take a lot of time. And especially when you get into problems, it's not going to be an hour a month. It's going to take more time than that, especially if you invest time into learning what and how to work and what are the right answers. So you're earning, in my opinion, you are earning what you're paying or what you're being paid. How common or advisable is it the townships have a website and place their minutes on the website? I wouldn't say it's very common, just it's not that it's, I just don't know the number. There are some that do them. And the question being, how often do you get to update it? Some are very good about it. It takes time to do a website, especially to keep it updated. So you can certainly do that. One downside, the legislature has put added requirements for reporting on townships and local governments if you have a web page, which is just a way of encouraging local governments not to have a web page. So it adds duties to you if you do this. For example, if you have a web page, you automatically must put up all of the candidate financial reports in any election. You just have to. And if you don't have a web page, you don't have to touch them. So it's one of these things that it was a good intent, but it really is also something that gives local governments pause to not do it at all. Whether it's advisable is completely up to you and how much you guys want to do it. Whether you put your minutes up there is, again, a political decision. That will be a supervisor decision, because data release is a supervisor decision. The data is owned by the township, meaning the supervisors control it. The clerk and the treasurer hold data. You're just holding it, but you don't own it and you don't control it as a clerk and treasurer. Okay. Facebook, I do not recommend anyone use Facebook at any time for whatever reason. I say that with a Facebook account of my own, but no, Facebook, unless you really understand what you're doing with it and how to turn off comments, you're opening yourself up to public comments that you can't get rid of without invoking some big First Amendment questions and problems. So I do not recommend anybody have a Facebook page for a township, and even as a candidate, don't do it. Who's the expert on website requirements? We have one to make sure we're doing it correctly. I don't know if anybody's the expert. I guess we'd have to look. The one that comes up commonly is the reporting for the financial reports for candidates. We'd have to go look. I don't remember offhand other than that. Not sure if we have a website for township, but can it be disabled? Yeah, you can always turn something off entirely. But whenever you do websites or you do public comment, like with Facebook or anything else, you're opening yourself up to viewpoint restrictions if you're trying to limit what certain people put on there. That's the First Amendment issue. So yeah, you could get rid of it entirely. Okay, it is 11:28. We're done in advance, and I know the next one's coming up here, so I'm gonna stop here. Remember that there's lots of resources, and it can be overwhelming with how many resources you have. So please call, get help if you need. We'll point you to the right thing. Next up, you have Officer of the State Auditor, Mark Albarado, with a look at CTAS, which is a very helpful program that we recommend every township get on. It is something that all townships can afford. It's low cost. It's a one-time fee, basically, as I understand it, and everybody gets access to it. But it also will help you clerks and treasurers with reporting at different times. And can't recommend it highly enough that you start to use that. So thank you.